Dinner at the Bakugo's residence. Throughout the week since Izuku came out with the secret that he is the principal's son, all of his teacher's family members have made it their duty to remind the class that they were there when he was growing up. It was started subtly at first when Aizawa waved slightly to him before leaving the classroom. That should have been his first clue since his uncle hasn't done that before in front of people. The subtlety didn't last long since Hisashi threw a huge plush at him during his English class along with smaller ones to Iida and Shoto so they didn't feel left out. That interaction made a few of his classmates laugh while others smiled. Midnight's history class was more tolerable even with the giant plush between his legs. But then his aunt granted him a sticker right on his forehead from answering a question correctly when everyone else had stickers placed on their hands or placed on their notebooks. Again, it was more tolerable than throwing a plush at his head at the beginning of class. Ectoplasm's class went the same as usual until there was some leftover time before the class bell rang. So he filled the time by talking about how young Izuku was so good at hiding since he always snuck off into different rooms inside of UA. The bell rang before he could start another story, much to the disappointment of some of his peers. Cementos had a framed picture of younger Izuku on his shoulders placed on his desk. Mina and a few other girls awed at the picture. Izuku calmly turned to Cementos, who returned his questioning look with his signature smile. He only got a break during lunch because of Lunch Rush, who decided not to embarrass the teen, but he did give head tilt at the large plush attached to his back and the star sticker right in his forehead. His suspicion that the teachers had some sort of competition proved to be true when All Might told a story of when he first met Izuku during hero training class. Day after day, Izuku had attention brought to him by several staff members who had known him since forever. All of that led up to the planned dinner that Nedzu was currently driving to on Thursday night. They were both on their way to the Bakugo's house following directions from Izuku, who mapped out the quickest way to the house using online GPS. Nedzu made sure some of them were dressed nicely to make a good impression towards them. Izuku glanced back in the backseat with two separate boxes on the seats. He knew that his father must have plans for any kind of encounter that the night might have. He should know since he saw his father pack a photo album in one box and a sword disguised as a cane in another. When they pulled up, an older gentleman opened the front door of the house. The man introduced himself. "Welcome, I'm Bakugo Masaru." Nedzu smiled while Izuku shook the man's hand. Nedzu said, "Thank you for inviting us. You can call me Nedzu, and this is my son Izuku." "Hello," Izuku greeted warmly. A blonde woman who looked remarkably like his classmate came up behind him. "And I'm his wife, Bakugo Mitsuki, and our son, Katsuki." Katsuki gave a sharp nod, which Izuku returned. "It's lovely to officially meet you and your family, Bakugo." Katsuki swallowed and nodded silently to the principal. Mitsuki glanced back at the food cooking away in the kitchen. "The food isn't ready quite yet, so you boys can go play outside or do whatever while dinner is still cooking. I'll call you both when it's done." Nedzu glanced over at his son and tilted his head towards Katsuki. Izuku smiled back at him before following Katsuki, who was headed towards the backyard. When the sound of a sliding glass door shutting reaches his ears, Nedzu recognizes this as a chance to talk about the situation. That is probably why Miss Bakugo sent them away. "So I'm sure you have questions for me like I have for you. So let's start with that while our children play." Nedzu started with a reassuring smile as he sat down on the couch. "I think I should start with why you invited me and Izuku for dinner. I got a small amount of information from my son who said that you both know about his mother." "Right, yes, we both knew Inko. I was her friend and I introduced her to Masaru when we first started dating. We were close, almost like sisters. We got pregnant around the same time as each other, only a few months apart. We planned out future play dates and all that kind of shit." Mitsuki glanced around the room, "and all those plans didn't really unfold the way life wanted it to. As to why I invited you, I don't really know how to pinpoint the reason. When my son told me about a boy that looked just like Inko and was the same age that Inko's boy should be, I wanted to meet him. I wanted to see how her son grew up and learn who raised him after that asshole just left him," Mitsuki stated. He watched as she gazed at a photo of the two parents with a happy green-haired woman in a picture frame. "I'm just happy to know that he has been taken care of. I knew that's what she wanted for him, to be loved and treated well. And I can see that you seem to be treating him very nicely," Mitsuki said, walking over to the kitchen to check on the food. She turned back to him with a stern look on her face. "But if I suspect or find anything proving otherwise, I will have a bone to pick with you." "Same to you," Nedzu replied. "I took down Endeavor and I can take down any smaller case of civilians as well. I once took down an entire school for the way they treated my son on his first day." "Was it that one around this area? We heard about that on the news when that happened," Masaru said. He paused to test the spiciness of the dish and nodded to himself. "Our son wasn't enrolled there, but his teacher did become more strict on him and others, which was kind of what he needed, honestly." "Good to know that you're protective over your son," Mitsuki commented as she lowered the heat on the stove. "I get that way over Katsuki, but it's more like chewing out the people in charge. But I like your style and the way you handle things." "So you approve of the way I have been raising Izuku?" Nedzu asked with his teacup raised in the air. "You're not going to try and do anything to jeopardize that?" Mitsuki shook her head as Masaru placed the dinner plates down on the dining table. "I'm not one to judge someone's parental skills, and from what I've seen, you have been doing great." "Good, you fell into the first line of action," Nedzu remarked with a smile. He murmured into his tea, "I would have hated to ruin my cast iron pan." Masaru and Mitsuki turned back to him from their place in the kitchen area. "What?" Nedzu ignored both of their confused looks as he clasped his paws together. "I would have hated to waste the opportunity to show you Izuku's baby photos. I have them in my car just in case this night is going to go smoothly." When Nedzu walked out of the front door, Mitsuki turned to her husband. "Did he say cast iron?" "It's better not to question it and just pretend we heard nothing," Masaru retorted. While the adults talked in the living room, Bakugo sparred with Izuku outside to pass the time. Izuku's button-down shirt was neatly folded on a chair on the patio. Bakugo's backyard was what Izuku assumes that every kid and parent dreamed of. There was a nicely decorated patio with a grill nearby for gatherings. The big tree had a small treehouse nestled in the branches, and there was a sitting area around a pile of wood for a bonfire to take place. "Wow, I'm covered in grass stains." Izuku looked down at himself before pointing at his opponent with a smirk. "Oh look, so are you." "Yeah, no shit, that's what happens when you fight on grass, nerd," Bakugo retorted, swiping at his pants. "Ready for round 2?" Izuku nodded right before the blonde launched at him with force, taking him aback. He used the tree behind him as a diversion by drawing Bakugo into hitting the tree bark and attempting to climb onto the tree branch quickly. But Bakugo had the upper hand since he has been climbing this tree for most of his childhood to get fit for UA, so he easily pulled Izuku down. When the second round ended with Bakugo as the victor, Izuku looked down at his hands. "I have been wondering why you invited me." Bakugo looked over at him in the middle of his stretching. "Not even that part." Izuku stretched his hands to take hold of his foot and stretched out his body. "The fact that you narrowed down that my last name is Midoriya and invited me to this whole dinner. I figured it out when you dumb face reminds me of the photos my mother has of my aunt, her old friend." Bakugo waved his hand in the air. "She always told me about my auntie and co. and how I would have been friends with her son. I just figured it out since your family name started with M and how you look just like her." Izuku blinked back at him. "I look just like her?" "Well, I think you got the curly hair and freckles from your deadbeat dad." Bakugo narrowed his eyes. "You look like a spotted piece of broccoli." "Huh, I have been compared to a strawberry before, but not a piece of broccoli yet," Izuku commented. "But broccoli does make more sense since it's more green." "Boys' dinner is ready." The two teenage boys looked at each other before racing to the sliding glass door to see who would get to the food first. Bakugo won only because he had familiarity with the area. Bakugo stopped short of celebrating his small victory to pause at the scene that was happening before him. Izuku padded up to him quietly, watching the expression that Bakugo had on his face that was a tie between embarrassment, confusion, and a bit of anger. Izuku peeked around the corner to see the truly horrific sight happening before him. It was only their first meeting, and both of their parents were sharing baby photos of each of them towards each other. You fool?" Bakugo ran his hands down his face to censor himself because Izuku's dad was the principal of the school he went to. "Kidding me?" "Hey brat, nice of you two to show up. We were just comparing photo albums here." "Yes, I can clearly see that." Izuku remarked as politely as he could while glancing down to see one of his Halloween costumes as a sheet ghost. Masaru came from the kitchen right on time before Katsuki blew up something. Masaru helped Katsuki calm down away from the sight of the photos while Mitsuki guided Izuku and Nedzu to the dining table. Masaru came back with Katsuki right as Mitsuki finished putting down all the plates of food onto the table. All of them said thanks for the meal before digging right into the home-cooked meal. The two main servings were a chicken Alfredo and katsudon. Nedzu couldn't help himself to a second serving of the Alfredo, a fact that Masaru took note of. After dinner, there was a long talk over tea where Katsuki didn't talk much, but Izuku noticed that he did pay close attention. Nedzu recounted the story of finding Izuku, along with providing a photo from that day. Mitsuki talked about a story of the making of the treehouse in the backyard, which was apparently a father and son project that lasted a long time because his father had to convince him that they couldn't attach cannons to the railings. The conversation lasted a good amount of hours, which ended up in Izuku claiming them as family since they technically counted as maternal side. Before they left, Mitsuki stops them with a lavender-colored binder in her arms. "Wait, before you leave, I wanted to give this to you. She would have wanted you to have this." Izuku numbly nodded, taking the large binder from his auntie right before she messed up the curls on his hair with a grin on her face. "You two can come over anytime, just give a heads up." "All right, auntie," he remarked with his arms wrapped around the binder. With a quick glance at the inside, he could see several pieces of color paper and edges of photos peeking up from the contents inside. Nedzu took off into the night, letting some driving advice slip when he drove back home. Back in his room, Izuku opened the binder after he changed into his pajamas. His father was probably taking care of his fur before going to bed from the sounds of the water running. The first page was a title made of letter stickers which spelled out Inko and Izuku. Izuku turned the page to see the first picture was a green-haired woman holding a pregnancy test stick in her hands while rivers of tears poured from her eyes. The second picture was Auntie Mitsuki holding her while looking over to the camera with a look that read, "I told you so," like she was betting on something. The next set that covered a few pages were ultrasound pictures that depicted black and white imagery of what he looked like when he was the size of a grape until he grew bigger and bigger in each picture. A bunch of pictures that followed were Mitsuki and his mother shopping for baby clothes with Masaru in the background. Both of them had pregnant bellies, with Auntie's being a little bit bigger in size. His throat suddenly tightened when he deduced who was probably behind the camera since Masaru was in the background. The next multiple pages were filled with captured moments from his baby shower with his pregnant mother sitting amongst all the gifts. The picture shows her laughing face as she played with water balloons in the grass or watching Masaru eat with a baby bib around his neck. There was even a photo of her cutting into a light yellow cake to reveal a light blue inside. Although in the baby shower section, he did notice a lot of post-it notes and stickers covering the photos in certain ways that framed the photos well. The next photos were taken at random moments, with Inko sitting by Mitsuki's side while she was holding her own infant son in her arms. His mother held a baby Bakugo in her arms who looked fussy while he drank from a bottle. Again, he noticed a lot of stickers and other decorations around the pictures that primarily showed his mother and her pregnant belly. There was another section with a post-it note telling him that Masaru hired one of his photographer friends to do a maternity shoot. And for 6 pages straight, he viewed a picture of his pregnant mother in different dresses, all looking lovingly down at her stomach. Why was his throat so dry? He reached over to grab a sip of water from his nightstand before continuing with the binder. The next photo was of his birth, photos of his mother in the bed with Katsuki next to her at certain points, pictures of him looking like a red potato raisin hybrid since he was a newborn, and the last picture in the section was his mother holding him skin to skin with tears in her eyes and a smile on her face as she looked down at his scrunched-up face. The rest of the binder was filled with notebook pages from Mitsuki. They were dated about 14 years ago, writing directly to him that spanned the rest of the binder. He flipped pages, skimming certain words in the letters personalized for him to receive. "If I ever get the chance to see you again, I want to tell you all about her, and give you this binder that we made together," he read out loud from the last notebook page in the scrapbook binder. He turned the last page to see something that surprised him. On the last page was a picture of a gravestone next to an elegantly drawn map of Musutafu Cemetery where the gravestone is located. The date was fairly new, like it was added recently compared to other entries. The location of his mother's grave, a mother he never got to know. Midori appeared down at the grave photo before flipping through the earlier pages to see exactly what his mom looked like. Bakugo wasn't kidding about the resemblance. Maybe he could visit the graveyard one day to visit her. Near the end of the week, the teachers pulled back from embarrassing Izuku and to a lesser extent Tenya and Shoto. They might just be holding back for a later date, but for now everything calmed down. At least that's what he thought until the intercoms came on during lunchtime. "Hello students, it is I, Principal Nedzu, with a fun announcement." "Oh no," Izuku mumbled. He had a bad feeling about what announcement would be fun for every student in UA to hear. "Oh yes," Shoto's eyes lit up with a teasing glint as he swirled his cold soba noodles in the bowl. "I was wondering how long it would take him to join in," Iida commented with his hand pointed towards the intercom speaker. "I was expecting this to happen sometime sooner though, since he would have found out about the competition earlier on." Uraraka glanced up at the speaker and back to Izuku's face. "Is he gonna?" Nedzu's voice crackled through the speaker. "Several of the staff made a competition to draw attention to my own son during different times, but they should have known who exactly would win in this battle, so I waited until the perfect time." Izuku subtly started to slide down in his seat to hide under the table while his two childhood friends were not trying hard to hide their amused expressions. At least Uraraka and Tsuyu looked apologetic for what was about to happen. Well, Uraraka did. Tsuyu was listening intently while staring right up at the intercom speaker near the top of the wall. "And that's why I decided to tell a short story from my little mouse's time at UA when he was still young. He used to join me on the intercom for announcements when he was younger," Nedzu said. He could hear the flipping of paper over the speaker. He could just imagine his father looking at the photos from that day. "After a deep dive into all the stories I could possibly tell, I have decided to recount the missing octopus plush that happened exactly 10 years ago." Izuku slowly rose into his seat to see Bakugo fumbling with his phone in his pocket, no doubt recording the interaction. He caught the other's gaze, which made Bakugo smirk at him evilly. No doubt it was payback because of how many embarrassing stories Auntie Mitsuki spilled the night before at dinner. Izuku held his chin up with his hand as he quickly started to eat to try and avoid the knowing looks of his class. Aoyama shot him a glance when Nedzu started to talk about how he liked his sparkly shoes the most at that time. Some of his classmates gave him apologetic looks of pity since his father was recounting an embarrassing story of him, while others grinned at every detail that his father said. Shoji glanced down at his own arms. Monoma looked over at his table for a moment to see how quickly Izuku was shoveling food into his mouth. He turned his attention back to his own class to see that Honuki was translating in bits and pieces to Tsunotori. He had to admit that whoever Nedzu's son was must be feeling really embarrassed right now. Mirio was grinning brightly at his table with Hato while Tamaki ate his lunch calmly. They all listened to the story, with Mirio being the most excited to hear the story and being the most loud in laughter as Nedzu recounted how Izuku ran after anything resembling his toy while covered in foam and glitter from passing by the support class. The third and second years hid their smiles in their food while looking away from the first year section, so they wouldn't give any hints to who the little mouse was. Right as Nedzu finished the story, Izuku finished his last bite of his food with Bakugo still secrecy recording until right after the intercom clicked off with a cheerful "Have a good day, students, you too, little mouse." Aoyama slowly came up to his table as Izuku tried not to blush so no one else would know who he was. He politely smiled to everyone at the table before sitting down with his lunch of red liquid in a thermos that Izuku expected to be red wine of some sort, the amount of cheese he saw on Aoyama's plate. "Would you like some?" Aoyama offered with his signature grin with his purple eyes sparkling. Izuku looked up to see the genuine sincerity in his face instead of a teasing expression. It would be so easy to make a joke about cheese and him being the little mouse, but he could tell that Aoyama wasn't doing that at all. Izuku looked down at his plate with a relieved sigh. He stared down at the selection of cheeses he had before spotting a recognizable one he liked. "May I have some of your Humboldt fog?" Aoyama smiled happily before sliding a piece of cheese over to him on a smaller plate as everyone continued with their lunch. He could hear Bakugo's unholy snort when he saw that Izuku was eating cheese, no doubt connecting the obvious joke in his head. He glared at him and stuck out his tongue at the blonde who was trying to get control of his unhinged laughter that he was muffling behind his hand. He ignored him and instead listened to the conversation going on around him at the table, with Aoyama telling everyone about the cheese he had brought with him to lunch. He noticed how Aoyama proudly showed off his knowledge, like how Iida was when he talked about something that sparked his interest. Tsuyu attempted to cheer him up by stating, "If my parents worked here, they would be doing the same kind of stuff, Kiro." Uraraka enthusiastically nodded, imagining what her parents would do if they ever had jobs at UA. She spent her time nibbling on cheddar cubes while she listened to Aoyama talk about gourmet cheeses he had tasted before. "I think that parents have a specific blackmail folder for their kids when they grow up just to embarrass them. Sometimes it's a photo album and other times you wished it was only a picture." After lunch, Izuku and his friends walked back to the classroom, with Shoto having an amused glint in his eyes while Iida pushed his glasses up his nose. "Well, at least the week is over. Maybe it will lessen from now on," Iida tried to reassure them when they made their way to their desks. "It's funny how you think this is over. The staff is just getting started." Aizawa's head jerked up when the three of them passed his desk. Shoto's eyebrows shot up. "The rest of the teachers here have been planning for this moment for a long time. Did you really think it would just be over in 1 week? Plus, we haven't even gotten started on Iida and Fukuyama yet," Aizawa explained, pulling himself further into his sleeping bag. Right as All Might's voice was heard from the hallway, Aizawa grinned. "Have fun." "Oh no," Shoto breathed out while Iida was frantically trying to remember how many stories that the staff members had on him. Izuku's smile returned as he slowly turned to his two oldest friends. "Oh yes. FANRT. This is brought to everyone by the talented Spacing Out. https://spacing out, Tumblr. com/post/646,283,298,741,239,808 more fan art for other fics more likely than." And another piece of fan art is inside the fan art book by Wattpad user Nikki Bones. Search them up and you will find some cute fan art as well. Embarrassing revenge. And like Aizawa said, Tenya and Shoto had their embarrassing spotlight the week that followed. It started bright and early on Monday when Aizawa had put a pottery project that Shoto had made when he was younger on his desk. It was a small and simple vase object that had red paint all over it with white splashes to resemble something like flowers. And everyone could tell he did it because of the obvious carving of his name in kanji on the side. And that was only the beginning. Cementos changed his background for his computer projected on the wall to all three of them as kids, which was more heartwarming than humiliating. He could still see Tenya drag a hand down his face as he started to write his notes. He glanced at Mina to see that she kept looking back up at the photo to look at the young faces of her classmates. Shinso grinned in the back while Midnight started to recount a story about how Shoto thought that fairy tale creatures were from actual history. She went into detail, much to the delight of the girls, when she recalled how Shoto ventured into the forest to try and lure unicorns to him. "When I asked why they would be lured, he said that they would like his colors," Midnight added, gesturing towards Shoto's hair and eyes. Shoto pouted with his arms crossed as some of the girls giggled in their seats. "I had to tell him that they were from the West and that Japan didn't have creatures like he read about." Shoto groaned as they were waiting for another class to start while Tenya pushed his glasses up. It could have been worse. Between classes, Snipe passed by the trio and ruffled all of their hair as he walked without stopping towards his classroom. Izuku smiled as Tenya tried to flatten out his hair while Shoto didn't bother reaching up to fix his hairstyle. He stifled a laugh at the bedhead look that Shoto was sprouting since his white and red hair strands were mixing together. Present Mike's class went normally until near the end when Mike paused in his lesson to pull up an example video. Izuku looked over to his friends to see how tense they were, waiting for the surprise to happen. "I found this video when looking for good examples to show you," Mike began as he tapped on the keyboard of his laptop. The projector was already on and the class was watching as he dragged the mouse over to the video player in his files. "Thankfully, I had this video stored on my personal computer, so I switched it over to my work laptop to show all of you. This should help with your pronunciation from hearing it directly." "Personal computer," Shoto pointed out quietly. "That can't mean anything good." Tenya's eyes darted to the screen to see what Mike's mouse was pointed to. His eyes widened when he saw the title simply labeled Vroom. He shut his eyes and sunk his head into his palms to try and hide. He mumbled through his palms as the video started. Oh no. The class watched as the video began with a young man sitting in front of the camera. This is my good friend, Iida Tensei. You all may recognize him as the pro hero, Ingenium, and Iida's older brother. By now, everyone in class was either watching the screen intensely or glancing back at Iida for his reaction. Because the class has already learned from the past 2 weeks that the teachers are actively trying to embarrass 3 specific people from their class. They all watched as Tensei began to practice his English on video, with Mike guiding him through what he wanted him to say. This seems so silly, Tensei laughed. He looks cute, Hagakure whispered. Brother. Mina awed at the screen when the young version of Tenya ran up to his brother's side. Oh my gods, look at him. You look so small, dude, Kirishima stated. Tenya turned his face from smashing against his hands to answer, we are all small at the age. He turned his head and tried to hide behind his arms. Young Tenya asked, what are you doing with Uncle Yamada? We are practicing our English, Tensei answered back with a smile, ruffling his little brother's hair in the video. And you can help if you want. I can help, Tenya asked with little stars in his eyes at the idea of aiding his brother and his uncle. Tensei turned his gaze behind the camera, Yamada. Of course you can, Mike confirmed loudly, pointing the camera right at the young child. Okay, buddy, can you act like a car, but all in English? Tenya tilted his head like a confused puppy, so a talking car. Yes, exactly, little listener Yamada. Izuku suggested to his embarrassed friend, I feel like he was recording in case something like this happened. I think it was for a project he was working on back then, Tenya said. At least that's what I understood, but now I'm not so sure it was for a project at all. Try not to crash into anything, Tenya, Tensei warned gently, giving a half-hearted glare towards Mike behind the camera. Tenya stiffly nodded and everyone watched as he jogged in place for a few seconds like he was hyping himself up for the role. Present Tenya was cursing his younger self by allowing his uncle to video the entire memory. All right, ready, Mike said on the video in English. Just remember what I taught you. Tenya straightened up, the light reflecting off his glasses in the video. Iida peeked up from the arm wall he made to hide. In broken English, young Tenya yelled out, I'm a motor vehicle. Mike smiled at Tenya, who was trying to remain sitting up straight while hiding his face into his arms and not succeeding. He compromised by sitting up straight and looking anywhere but the screen. When Mike caught his gaze, he narrowed them right at his uncle. Vroom, the young child shouted before taking off running to the couches to run across the cushions, and then ceremoniously falling over the side of it. Be careful, Tensei loudly recalled while Mike cackled in the background. Zero tried to stifle his chuckle to try and be respectful while Kaminari was howling with silent laughter. Kirishima bit into his fists to stop himself from laughing out loud. Young Tenya continued by starting to use his engines to run faster. Vroom. Shinso snickered in the back, hiding behind his uniform sleeves. Dark Shadow was laughing while Takami stared at the screen with wide eyes. Shoji was grateful for the mask so no one could see how far the edges of his mouth came up in a gigantic grin. VROOOWW, young Tenya ran straight into the coat closet door. Kirishima finally broke and unleashed the laughter he was holding back. Sato slammed his fist down on his desk as he tried to hold back his chuckles from becoming too loud but ended up choking a bit. Koda put his hand over his mouth while Ojiro winced when he saw the child slam into the door. Tsuyu put her hand to her chest as she reflected back on heartfelt memories of her younger siblings that took care of, while Uraraka was pushing back her laughter behind her hand, trying not to look back at her newfound friend since she felt bad for laughing. Young Tenya mumbled against the door, just audible enough for the camera to pick up, ow. The video ended with Tensei rushing over to his younger brother to check on him. One day during lunch, Izuku visits Mei to help her and talk with her. They allow support course students to use their creations as long as they get permission, and I have no doubt in my mind that my bobbies won't fail me, Mei rambled as she looked down at her invention with her steampunk goggles on, red handle screwdriver. I need to get permission as well. I plan on using an extending staff to help out with any fights, Izuku said as he handed Hatsume the correct tool. Hatsume tightened the screw and banged it with the handle to make sure it would stay. You sure? It was buried in the rulebook. It was sort of a loophole since the extending staff I have was made as a support item, but it just doesn't have the bells and whistles it was supposed to have in the original blueprint. So when I brought it up to my dad, he laughed. Hatsume moved her goggles up to push back her dirty pink hair. Is that good or bad? Izuku explained with a smile as he started to talk about his father. That means he approves since I looked really hard into the rules where no one would really pay attention. He likes it when I find loopholes. So he laughs because he approves. He has different kinds of laughs, Izuku retorted. When you grow up with him, you learn how to differentiate between the laughs to see what kind it is. So when he laughed that way, I knew it was because he approved of what I did. Have you ever heard his mad laugh? Hatsume asked, using her quirk to slightly zoom into the inner workings of her invention to see if anything needed rewiring. I know what it sounds like, but he never used it against me, Izuku clarified. He hasn't really gotten angry at me before, like the kind of real anger that makes him laugh like that. Wow, Hatsume whispered as she tightened one screw of one of her inventions. It was a bit bigger than Izuku's jetpack that power loader made, but it didn't look like it functioned as a jetpack. Your dad sounds cool. Izuku nodded before his eyes wandered below the invention to see the metal rods poking out from the bottom. He pointed at the metal rods with a mildly confused expression. What is that? You'll see at the sports festival. May hugged the jetpack invention baby to her chest only to receive a plume of ash directly to her cheek. I'll make sure my bobbies get the spotlight they deserve. Izuku chuckled. I can't wait to see them in action. Wait a second, I almost forgot. Hatsume paused in what she was doing to turn to Izuku with a grin. I made a baby, I haven't tested it out yet. Izuku returned the crazed grin. Where is it? Hawks wasn't entirely sure why the commission sent him for something any other worker could check on, but he would only guess it was because of how the Hero Commission viewed the Chimera Principle. He made his way down the halls during midday when the students would be having lunch. He only came to get some information on the attack since they needed more detail, but Hawks knew that it wasn't the real reason. The real reason would be the hacker that managed to brush by the Commission's firewall security. The hacker had enough time to download a few files before exiting out of the server within 3 minutes. And no matter where anyone looked, the Commission wasn't sure what the hacker was looking for. They didn't try and go into the highly secured files or any of the major hero information that they had in the database as far as they could tell. But all that really mattered was the words the hacker left behind. Reform is inevitable. Those words led to the Commission secretly freaking out about what the hacker was planning. And the Hero Commission was on edge since Nedzu seemed to know about the hacker. They would think anything of it since he was one of the most intelligent creatures alive. But they still felt a chill down their backs like the Chimera was hiding something from them, or someone. Hawks ran his gloved hand over his mouth as he continued to walk through the halls of the infamous UA, wondering where the principal's office was. And right as he was about to pass the support class, his feathers sensed something happening within the room. Hawks looked closely at the large classroom door only to see it bang open for a student with green hair to come silent through metal wings attached to his back. Metal wings that were too small for his body, but still held up his weight relatively nicely. Great, it hasn't exploded yet, a girl yelled out as she ran through the door. Hawk's eyebrows raised at the statement before he heard a sharp intake of breath from the green-haired big in the air. Do you feel anything breaking? I can hear squeaking, the boy called out before his green eyes landed on Hawks, who was standing on the other side of the open door. Oh, hello. He noticed how the girl followed the other students' gaze to land right on the number 3 hero. Hatsume stared openly while her friend was bouncing onto the sides of the walls since that's where the metal wings were leading him to. The boy asked loudly from the ceiling, how do I control this? You don't, they're just designed to take you off the ground to get you away from any trouble, like an emergency getaway, she replied. Heyo, Hawks greeted warmly with a 2-finger saluting wave. He glanced up at the other student. Have you designed anything to get him down? She paused and hummed to herself, thinking about her invention. She snapped her fingers. Nope, not yet. Hawks nodded to himself before sending some of his red feathers to gently help the boy escape from banging against the wall again. Once the boy was safely on the ground, he took off the wings to give back to the girl with goggles on her head. Next time, Hatsume, you might want to have some sort of exit strategy even for a prototype, the boy advised before sighing in relief. I'm just glad we tested this inside instead of outdoors. Yeah, the girl looked back at the hero while the wings kept trying to flap even with her gloved hand restricting the movements. Say, do you need any support items? Hawks waved off her offer politely. I am in no need of any support items as of right now, but thank you for the offer. Right, I'll get back to that girl's costume. I should be done with it right before the sports festival. Thank you again, Hatsume, the boy said before the girl closed the door behind her. So what brings you to UA? Do you need to talk with one of the teachers? Close, I need to talk with the principal. I wanted to know a bit more about the attack, Hawks replied. Would you know where the office is? I spent my education at Shiksu, so I'm unfamiliar with this school layout. I know where his office is. I can take you there, the green-haired student offered. You sure, kid? Hawks questioned, his feathers picking up the vibrations of talking from the lunch hall where the other students were talking and eating with their classmates. I have time, the boy replied. I had a light lunch today, so there's no need to worry if I'm missing lunch or anything. What's your name, kid? Hawks asked as the student started to lead the way down the hall towards the stairwell. Izuku said with a pause, Midoriya Izuku. Hawks took notice of how long the pause. All right, kid, show the way. Izuku nodded back at him, leading the way up the stairs. Hawks noticed how different he carried himself while walking up the stairs. Back at his own high school, many students were afraid of walking to the principal's office even when they weren't in trouble, or how lost first-year students would get. But Izuku didn't look uncomfortable or lost at all. He walked with the confidence of someone who had been at the school for years, and he didn't know what to think of it. Hawks followed after him until they passed by the faculty room with the principal's office right down the hall. Izuku continued to walk with him until they got to the door. Izuku politely knocked on the door before Hawks could stop him. Hello, Principal Nedzu. Hawks has come to the UA to speak with you. I've been waiting, Nedzu called out from inside. Hawks could only guess that Nedzu had been watching him from the security cameras since he came on campus, which meant that he could have easily sent a faculty member to point him in the right direction. Izuku opened the door and gestured for Hawks to walk inside. He smiled at the hero. I'll go back to my friends. I hope you have a good day, Hawks. See ya, kid. Hawks waved at the friendly student before making his way into the office where the Chimera principal was waiting for him at his desk with a teacup in his paws. Nedzu sipped his tea, setting it down with a soft clink on his desk. Hawks smiled and stiffened as Nedzu's own soft smile grew on his face. Would you like some refreshments? The next day, Ectoplasm had a little cartoon car-themed frame on his desk with Iida's childish scrawl on the bottom corner. During lunch, Izuku was sitting beside his friends who were just trying to eat their lunch in peace. Izuku finished a bit more quickly than everyone else so he could check on Mei. When he was throwing away his trash in the bin, he felt someone approach him from behind. Hello, Monoma said. I would like to talk with you about something with you. Sure, Izuku started, glancing up at the clock to check the time. I have time to talk. What is it? Not here. I rather we do this a bit more away from people. Izuku glanced around before gesturing towards the halls where not too many people would visit, but enough of the lunchroom chatter would cover their talk. We can talk over there if you want. Monoma looks towards the spot before nodding. That looks good enough. When Izuku caught the attention of his friends, he waved off their worry as he followed Monoma to the empty halls. The lunchroom chatter was enough to provide some noise in the background to not make the halls sound empty. So what did you want to talk about? Monoma sighed, cocking his head back. I was there with Tetsu on that day after you guys recovered from the attack. I heard what you said to the rest of the people in the hallway who were crowding around the door. Monoma paused for an amount of time like he was trying to gather his words, which made Izuku blink back at him, and I'm not going to lie to you, Monoma said honestly. I thought that at least some of your class was looking down at Class 1B and the rest because you got your names out there to be recognized more quickly, leaving the rest of us in the dust. I thought the entirety of your class was going to be rubbing it in others' faces about how you survived an attack. Now I know that wasn't the case by your brief speech that day. I genuinely thought that your hero class was going to brag about how much attention you brought to yourselves and how it would affect your upcoming hero careers in a few years, since everyone will remember the infamous class that survived a big villain break-in before they were in their first year. What made you think we were like that? Izuku asked with a mildly understanding expression as Monoma spoke his feelings. That I was like that. Well, I didn't feel that you were like that. I have talked with you before and it didn't really seem like you were like that at all. Monoma glanced over with pursed lips. But it didn't stop me from assuming the worst of your class. Look, I have been exposed to a lot of arrogant people in my past who would act like that. If they were involved or close to a villain attack, they would act like they were the heroes even if they did nothing. I'm not above to admit that I was previously wrong for my way of thinking at that moment. His cocky smirk returned briefly, and even if you got the attention of the media first, I will make sure my class doesn't get left behind in the shadows. Everyone will know Class 1B of UA. And I don't doubt that all of you will succeed, Izuku smiled warmly. He extended his hand towards the blonde who looked down at his palm with a slight smile on his lips. I can't wait for the sports festival for all of us to show the world what we all have in store. As do I. Monoma shook his hand with Izuku's own strongly and firmly, like they were confirming the promise by the strength of their grip. I'll see you on the field. As will I, Izuku promised. That night at home was the weekly movie night that his father had planned for a long time to have bonding time, no matter how much work his father had during the week. Tonight's movie list was old superhero movies that came from comic books inspired by older comics during the pre-Quirk era. The movies were filled with superheroes that had powers that were gifted to them or they were born with. There was a hero that had technology that allowed them to fight evil with a powered suit, and there was another who was trained to be an assassin but chose the good side when they grew up. Heroes that got powers from radioactive waste, from lightning, or from dying and being reborn with regeneration powers. It intrigued Izuku a lot since the first time he encountered it was when he was around 9 years old. That is what made Power Loader decide to make him a jetpack for his birthday a few years ago. When the movie hit the rising point, Izuku looked excitedly at the multiple suits that the character had in his own lab that he made himself. All of them were different prototypes with similar builds that looked either slightly different from the original suit or like an entirely new design. Maybe Hatsume can make something like that for a hero costume prototype, Izuku thought to himself as the hero communicated to the suit's virtual assistant. By the sound of it, she will be more than happy to start blueprints on how to make a high-powered tech suit just like that. Izuku tilted his head. I wonder if Ten-chan would wear something like that in the future. Nedzu focused his attention on the screen. Young Iida would never wear something with too much tech such as the full-body prototype suit, but he might possibly have a powered-up tech upgrade to the bottom half of his suit. Except his engine ports, because I think Uncle Tensei said something about upgrading them in a certain way that can't be replicated through machinery and technology. Ah, I do believe I heard something similar from him before, about how the Iida family has been doing it for years when they are ready to upgrade their speed, Nedzu added on to his son's statement. I believe it involved ripping out the ports to allow new ones to grow that are stronger. That sounds like it would hurt, Izuku commented with a frown. He didn't want his friend to be in so much pain. I'm sure he won't try to do that kind of upgrade anytime soon. If he did, I believe he would tell you. Nedzu turned his head upwards to look at his son. You two have been very close since you were young. If that happens, I want to be there to comfort him, Izuku replied with clenched fists. Back at his one home, Iida Tenya sneezed and looked around his room like the problem was that his room probably had too much dust even though he cleaned up his room daily to keep it tidy. End. Nedzu * watches as Hawks walks into UA campus and prepares an extra cup of tea. Also Nedzu, frantically hiding every single piece of Izuku in his office so he won't raise any suspicion. I'll add to the hero commission along the way and what they know of Izuku and Nedzu and stuff. Izuku used his last name because Hawks is like Stranger Suo. Yeah. The teachers will mellow out the embarrassing moments in future. They just wanted to do the most in the 2 weeks before the sports fest. Also, feedback is very appreciated. I live getting comments since it actually motivates me to write now. Sports Fest Obstacle Course Race. Man, why couldn't we just wear our costumes? Mina asked while messing with the zipper of her gym uniform. All of Class 1A was currently getting ready in their designated waiting room. We have to keep everything fair, Ojiro swished his tail behind him. Izuku nodded at his remark. Many hero costumes have some sort of support gear that would help with that specific person's quirk, and that wouldn't be fair to anyone, especially if they aren't in the hero courses. Shoto walked up next to Izuku with a hum, but I do wonder why they can't make an exception for Mirio. Izuku paused and looked up in the corner of the ceiling as he thought about it. It would help them on the censoring budget, but again, it wouldn't be fair overall. Shiro looked over at Izuku with a grateful smile. By the way, thank you for your notes on my form. It helped when I was practicing. No problem, Izuku replied with ease. Izuku had made notes on each of his classmates from the first week on noticing how they fight and how they utilize their quirks. He used the second week at school to edit and add to the notes to make sure he didn't miss anything. And before the sports festival, he gave some of the main notes back to his classmates so they could use them for the incoming event. Your advice helped me a lot, Kirishima stated. I can't believe you had all of that in your notebook. I analyzed quirks in general since they have interested me since I was little. I have over 20 notebooks for heroes and villains' quirks I have analyzed, Izuku said while Shoto messed with the zipper of his uniform. Hagakure gasped in awe. Whoa, you must have analyzed a lot of quirks if you have 20 of them. Not just quirks, I look at their fighting styles and techniques as well to see how well they are, Izuku explained. Like some people know how to fight without using their quirk while others only depend on their quirk. The more I analyzed, the more I began to notice similarities in fighting styles between someone who relied on their quirk versus someone who didn't. That sounds dope, Mina commented with a bright grin on her face. I wonder what the first round will be. Rikito wondered out loud with a thoughtful look on his face as his gaze traveled upwards. Shoji shrugged with all 6 of his arm-like appendages. Takayami crossed his arms. No matter what comes, we will face it. Kaminari leaned onto his elbows on one of the tables in the waiting room. Hey, Izuku dude, do you know anything about the games and stuff? Izuku raised an eyebrow calmly. Are you assuming that just because I'm the principal's son that I know everything that is scheduled for the sports festival? Kaminari stretched his O's, which made his voice crack at the end. Some other classmates glanced over at hearing Izuku's demeanor change. I do know some vague things, but not the entire plan for the festival. But I wouldn't be much help since the rounds are all random either way for each year, so it's not like I could warn you of any specific games since I don't honestly know which ones we will face. Izuku replied kindly to his stressed classmate. He breathed out when he realized that the Kaminari was still a bit tense with worry. Okay, Izuku sighed before looking Kaminari directly into his eyes. Can you run? Kaminari hesitated. Yes. Can you jump? Yes. Can you use your quirk? Kaminari nodded like it was an obvious answer. Yes. You'll be fine. Izuku clapped his hands together like a magician did after showing off his tricks. The door opened to the 2 Class 1A representatives waiting outside the room with a shared determined look in their eyes. Is everyone ready? Iida asked loudly to everyone in the waiting room. Yaoyorozu had an excited gleam in her eyes but a serious look on her face. We will be entering soon. Izuku glanced back at Shoto, who stared right back at him. Shoto walked up to him as everyone started to pass through the door, ready for it. You know it, Izuku answered back. Hey, pay attention, audience. The UA Sports Festival is about to begin, everybody. Yeah, are you ready? Present Mike questioned loudly to the roaring crowd who was on the edge of their seats. Eraserhead was right next to him in a wheelchair covered in bandages as his co-host. It's time for the first-year students to enter the stage. The stadium played music as the students walked down the dark tunnel into the bright light of the huge stadium waiting for them. The crowd cheered as fireworks burst into the sky in celebration. One by one, Present Mike continued to hype up the crowd before giving introductions to all of the first-year students walking out from the tunnel. The infamous Hero Course Class 1A. The Talented Hero Course Class 1B. The Great General Studies Classes C, D, and E. The Amazing Support Course Classes F, G, and H. And the intelligent business course class, I, J, and K. Why so many adjectives? Eraserhead asked, his voice slightly muffled by the bandages. Present Mike cheered, I'm being supportive as the student's favorite English teacher. Aizawa had one of his bandages rise up with his eyebrow. You are the only English teacher at UA. Exactly, Present Mike yelped back in English. Will your dad be around here for the games? Shoto questioned. No, he is acting as the third year's umpire, Izuku replied back, gesturing over to where the third year stadium would be if any of them could see over the stadium walls. But he has everything set to record the events today for each of the years, so I'm sure he won't miss out on anything. Wait, so who's the first year's umpire? Uraraka asked after a brief pause. Her question was very quickly answered by the sound of heels clicking across the stage as Midnight, the R-rated hero, strutted to the mic podium. Whoa, Kaminari whispered to himself as a faint blush grew on his cheeks along with some other male classmates as the famous R-rated hero walked in front of them. Quiet, everyone! Midnight cracked the whip to gain attention and silence anyone speaking. Before we get started, we will hear a speech from the first-year representative. Representing the first-year students is Fukuyama Shoto from Class 1A. Shoto took a double take to process what Midnight had announced while all of his classmates' attention turned towards him. Wait, what? How? Iida answered, I'm guessing it is because you finished first in the entrance exam, that's how. Shoto looks back at his two friends with confusion written across his face. I was supposed to prepare a speech. I heard nothing about doing a speech. We have watched the games before together, and the representative that wins the most points gives the speech. It is a tradition, Iida answered Shoto, who was steadily looking around like he was either looking for someone else to do it or to find a good hiding spot. Izuku waved him towards the stage with his hand. Just speak from your heart and let the words flow out into something encouraging. Shoto glanced back at him as he was lightly pushed towards the stage. He mumbled back at him before he disappeared into the crowd of students. Easy for you to say. Shoto skipped up the stairs of the stage and walked up to the podium that Midnight was standing by. Without a single word, he heard a single cry from the crowd. Woo! Natsuo's voice came up from the crowd in an isolated shout that made Shoto immediately look towards him. He could see him, Fayumi, and Rei in the stands supporting him. They each had little homemade flags in their hands with red and white colors on them with designs he couldn't see from far away. Taoya must have snuck in some tickets, or Nedzu. Taoya was supposed to be patrolling around Hasu, but he promised that he would be watching or listening in some way to keep up with what happened. He gave his family a small smile for their support while a few good-natured laughs rose up from the crowd by the sudden shout. He turned back to the microphone in front of him to follow his friend's advice. Just keep it short, simple, and encouraging. Honestly, I didn't know I had to have a speech prepared, Shoto began, which made a few people from the crowd either nod in sympathy or laugh. Besides that, I plan to do my best and I want everyone to do their best as well, so we all can show what we are capable of. Plus Ultra, Shoto announced, making the crowd and students repeat the motto. Plus Ultra, many voices came together in a yell. In return, Shoto nodded and walked back down the stairs off the stage to rejoin his classmates. That was a good speech, Fukuyama Siro complimented. Thank you, Shoto replied. Rikido said, how did you come up with that on the spot? Shoto opened his mouth for a moment before closing his lips tightly together. He shrugged. I just said something that sounded mildly encouraging. With the speech out of the way, now it's time for the games to begin. The first game is the qualifier, Midnight announced as a screen behind her started to spin with all the possible choices. The students watched the options spin on the screen with different expressions on their face ranging from curiosity, boredom, impatience, or worry. This year's qualifying round is an obstacle course race. All 11 classes will participate in this race, and the course is the outer circumference of the stadium, which is about 4 kilometers. Midnight licked her lips. As long as you stay on the course, it doesn't matter what you do. Now, take your places, everyone. All 11 classes started to pile up near the thin exit leading to the outside of the stadium with lights adorning the top that will tell them when to start. Izuku gazed up at the lights of the door. I'm guessing this is the unofficial first obstacle. Iida pushed up his glasses. From the width of the exit and the amount of students, I would say you are correct. It would be narrowing down numbers right off the bat, Momo added from off to the side where most of the hero students were crowding around the exit. Tsuyu was looking at the walls of the exit while Shoji was looking around students' heads. Monoma brushed past Shoto as he moved to stand next to Tetsu, who was anxiously staring at the lights. Bakugo was staring down the students with a fierce look in his eyes. The students watched as the red lights turned to yellow slowly, making everyone in the stands wait on the edge of their seats from anticipation, until finally the lights turned green. As soon as the green lights came on, the students charged forward, pushing at each other to get through the exit. Most of the business students were piled at the back, not really caring enough to run since they knew that they wouldn't make it in, except one purple ball-haired student who was pushing at the very back to catch up. He was throwing balls at people's feet to make them stuck as he passed by with only a few problems. Shoto started off by freezing almost everyone's feet to the ground to make him gain ahead of anyone who was in front of him. The hero course students followed closely behind him. Momo hurriedly made a pole with her hand to wrench herself free of a piece of ice covering her feet and vaulting over the frozen students. Aoyama turned around to blast himself over the students, but when he landed, he grabbed his stomach harshly. Bakugo blasted forward with his explosions while Ojiro followed by using his tail as a pogo stick. Mina slid through the ice using her corrosive acid to glide across. Takayami jumped up and allowed Dark Shadow to practically carry him into the air to catch up with the rest of his classmates. Iida sprinted across the ice while Izuku skated across the ice more gracefully than other students who were slipping because of the years of practicing. Izuku looked behind him to see a familiar purple-haired teen using 3 other boys as a throne. He stifled a small laugh when Shinso saw him and gave him a regal wave from his position before fanning himself with his open hand. Shinso gave Izuku his own tired grin in his direction before focusing his attention on guiding the hypnotized students ahead. The foot race was stopped short from tall shadows that were covering the students in darkness. They all looked up to see giant robots looking down at them. The ones who took the hero exam already recognized the familiar appearance of the robots. Present mic crackled through the speakers, first barrier, Robo Inferno. Izuku looked up to see the same robots that were in the entrance exam for the hero course students. No one else has seen them besides the people trying out for the hero course at UA. The hero course has to fight those things. There are too many obstacles already. I can't get through this. Giant robots. Sometimes I wonder how UA has the budget for stuff like this, Momo commented as her gaze pointed upwards at the gigantic robots looking down at the group of students. Me too, Yoraka commented. Tsuyu pressed a finger to her chin, Kiro. I've done this once before, and I can do it again, Shoto said, pressing his hand down to the ground in front of him dramatically to make ice start forming. He waited until the robots were somewhat stable before making his next move. Sweeping his hand up through the air, he made a huge ice wave aimed straight towards the robots that was as high as the robots themselves. The icy fog cleared the reveal of the robots frozen in place while Shoto ran ahead under the legs of the huge robot in front of them. Shoto had frozen them completely. Izuku caught Iida's eyes for a brief moment. I got this covered, you go on ahead. Iida paused, are you absolutely sure? Just don't be upset when I end up beating you despite the head start. Izuku smiled, which made Iida return his grin. Iida gave a short wave to him before running straight through the robot's legs while everyone was still stunned by the epic power move that Shoto did in front of them. Bakugo launched into the air using his explosions to guide himself straight through the leg opening of the robot. Izuku makes it through with several other classmates before the giant robot starts to lean to the side, slowly falling over. When it hit the ground, there were no students that were hit by the falling robot. Pieces of robot chunks fly off the robot and towards them. Izuku picks up a small piece the size of a surfboard and takes it, never knowing what is going to happen next. Thank God, it already loose wires which made it easier to tie it to his back. Thankfully, it was not that heavy. He guesses it must have been near the head since the more dense metal made up the body. Behind him, he could hear the simultaneous yells of Kirishima and Tetsu. He looked behind him to see both of them popped out of the metal of the fallen robots. Our quirks are almost the same, Kirishima pointed out loudly as he began to climb over the robot arm. Tetsu climbed up after him and argued back, really, I haven't noticed. Izuku kept glancing back as he ran to the new obstacle waiting for everyone. He could see Shiro using his tape to swing over the robots and Takami being carried by Dark Shadow right behind him. Behind him, many students were fighting the smaller robots. He could see Monoma using an ice quirk to freeze more robots for more of his class to pass through more easier. Monoma caught him looking at him and gave him a lazy salute before freezing the floor so the other students behind them would slow down. Gyro was amplifying the sounds of heartbeat towards the robots. Kaminari was electrocuting ones that came too close to him. Kendo was slapping them away with her big hands. Uraraka was causing them to float up by letting her fingertips touch them before making them fall back down after she passed by each of them. Ojiro was slapping them away with his tail while Rikido was punching through them. Momo blasted them away with a cannon that she made quickly, making most of the robot debris disappear, which made more room for the other classes to catch up to the Hero Course classes pulling ahead. Everyone kept running until they could see a crowd of students waiting at the next obstacle. When Izuku arrived, he could see why most students were not moving. The next battle they had to face was tall pillars that had white ropes connecting to other pillars which led to the other side. But underneath the ropes was utter darkness with no visible net to catch anyone who fell. The first barrier was easy, but the next, Present Mike announced as others started to arrive at the second obstacle. It's the fall. If you fall, you're out. Hiro, Tsuyu exclaimed as she jumped straight towards the tied rope between the large pillars. Thankfully, she made it safely on the ropes. She started to crawl forward on the strong rope before commenting, "Wow, it's like a glorified tightrope with no net." "Wow, amazing," Tsunotori added as she looked down at the darkness underneath the large pillars and ropes connecting them. "Is there some kind of safety net down there?" one of the students asked, looking queasy at the barrier. Izuku looked ahead to see Iida wobbling on the ropes as he used one of his engines to propel himself while he crossed his legs to stay on. He could almost see the figure of his friend freezing the ropes and flashes of orange explosions. His green eyes caught sight of pink hair, and he immediately traveled closer to see what Mei was going to show off. "They must have won," Ojiro chimed in. "No one could survive a fall like that without one, quirk or not." "Ah, my chance to show off has finally arrived. It's time for my bobbies to be in the limelight," Mei said to herself as an excited grin grew on her face. She strengthened the straps of her inventions on the outside of her uniform, making her gain attention from the students. Izuku's expression brightened when he realized the familiar inventions that he only caught glimpses of through blueprints and separate pieces in the support lab. "Wait, how come you get to use all those items?" Mina asked curiously as Uraraka continued to watch Tsuyu crawl quickly over the ropes. Izuku watched, wondering how he was going to get across efficiently. The Hero Course undergoes combat training regularly. To keep it fair, the support course allowed any items and costumes as long as they made it themselves, Mei answered smugly. Mei looked around her audience and spotted the familiar green curls of Izuku. "And this is the perfect opportunity to show what my inventions have in store for the future of the pro-hero world." Mei reaches out towards him dramatically with her arm. Now knowing what else to do, Izuku walked forward to join his friend only for her to yank him into a stronghold where she was practically hugging him from behind. "And this is the time to test my invention's weight capacity. Perfect for rescue missions, my baby is designed to hold up to 4 people. Mei fixed the goggles on her face with one hand while handing Izuku straps under his arm to fasten. Izuku hurriedly fastened the straps because he knew what was about to happen next. He moved the robot metal surfboard piece to his side. He hoped the weighted metal wouldn't slow down Mei too much. Mei clicked a button which made the belt shoot wires that whizzed past Izuku's waist with a sharp sound to attach itself on the tall pillar. Mei fans up behind him which made Izuku kickstarts into running. Mei wrapped her arms around him from behind and jumped off the edge which made him briefly shriek from shock while most of his classmates watched from the cliffside. As they fell, the wired clutch kept its hold on the pillar before the wire tightened which made them fall sideways into the pillar. Izuku graced himself while Mei stuck out her boots from underneath his legs. And right as they were about to crash into the pillar, Mei's boots hovered right above the surface. Mei pressed another button which made the wire reel them in quickly while her boots continued to hover over the side of the pillar. Izuku hung in tightly to the straps that Mei had placed on him as they shot directly up the side of the pillar. And suddenly, Mei's boots weren't touching the pillar anymore. They were both up high in the sky, feet not touching any ground or rope below them. Izuku clutched the robot piece with one hand as Mei hung on tight to him with only one of her arms. Izuku laughed softly as both of them landed on the pillar safely. "Hey, the extra weight capacity wasn't on your blueprints when I checked them over with you," Izuku brought up when Mei jumped off the pillar with the wire swinging them in between the other tall pillars. Before them, Izuku glanced to see some students already making their way on the ropes after getting motivated by Mei's support gear-fueled move. "By the way, thanks for the ride." "Hey, I gotta keep some things from you," Mei replied with a smile as she hovered up the pillar. "Or else there wouldn't be any surprises like this, although I wasn't expecting you to have a random piece of robot with you." "Oh, this old thing?" Izuku asked, holding the piece of robot tightly to his chest, using the loose straps that originally kept it in place to hang on tightly. "Is it messing with the invention? It's not slowing us down or anything." "Nope," Mei said as they launched into the air for the third time already. "I almost perfected this baby." Izuku glanced behind him to stare into the dark lenses of Mei's goggles. "Almost." "Don't worry, I tested it. We won't fall into the abyss," Mei reassured him. Another moment passed before she added, "Hopefully." The whooshing of the air didn't mask a small creaking sound coming from the wire belt around Mei's waist. Hatsume-chan," Izuku mumbled back towards her. She leaned close to Whispriel while they fell towards the next pillar. "Don't focus on it." "Well, despite that worrying noise, I'm impressed with how it's holding both of us. It would be good for rescuing civilians," Izuku complimented as they shot upwards through the air again. "Well, I had to crunch on time, especially with the amount of my bobbies that I need to show off to the companies watching." Mei stared ahead with determination in her pupils as her sight zoomed in on the three leads heading towards the third obstacle ahead of them. "I just need them to recognize my talent and see how powerful and helpful my bobbies are. And then I became the best support gear inventor in Japan. I have no doubt in my mind that you will be very successful based on the ideas you have shared with me already," Izuku said honestly through the harsh wind blowing when they sailed down again with the wire belt around her waist. He clung onto her waist as they finally made it to the last pillar of the entire second obstacle. With one more move, they were both on the other side of the second barrier. Hatsume continued on her way by running with Izuku to the next stage, with Izuku pulling ahead because of all his previous training. He looked back to see some of his classmates still at the ropes, but steadily gaining on them. "Yes, I can't wait for the offers to buy some of my inventions. I can almost hear them now," Hatsume cheered, throwing up her fists into the air. Izuku smiled and played along by imitating a ringing noise as he ran a few steps ahead of her. He extended his pointer finger and pinky finger out and placed it against the side of his head. "Hello, oh, you're looking for Hatsume, support gear specialist? So sorry, she is already filled up with requests." Hatsume laughed wholeheartedly at the secretary's impression that Izuku was portraying. Izuku glanced back at her before talking into his pinky finger like it was a phone. "I can fill you in on," Izuku trailed off to flip through an imaginary schedule, licking one of his fingers to flip through it. He pointed down and said, 2 months from now on a Wednesday." Hatsume continued laughing while Izuku mimed scheduling the appointment before hanging up on his own hand. Hatsume cheered briefly as he sprinted ahead of her towards the next obstacle. Not too long after separating from Hatsume, Izuku found himself at the final obstacle, which was an empty field with dark circles all over the ground. "The last barrier is the minefield," Present Mike shouted over the speakers. His voice was accompanied by a small explosion of pink smoke caused by Tsuyu, who went off to the side from the impact. "The field is filled with landmines that will cause explosions once they are stepped on. These explosions will not cause any harm to the students, but they will make a great spectacle for the viewers watching." Izuku's eyes traveled to an explosion further down the field. The smoke cleared to show Iida, who was struggling to run through the landmines without getting caught in the explosions. He squinted to see Shoto and Bakugo walking carefully through the mines far ahead, but it looked like they were fighting each other as they moved past the buried explosives, if the pushing was any indication. He looked back down at the landmines in front of him and started to go over plans on how he could pass the field quickly, maybe if he ran fast enough along the outskirts. Boom! His eyes caught Iida's form again as his childhood friend had their blue hair slightly sticking up from the recent explosion. The first plan was already out the window before he even finished the thought of it. Second and most obvious plan was to just avoid the landmines while he walked through it. but from the large field and how many of the students were already on the field, he knew he wouldn't be able to pass them on foot. With only another second of pondering, a plan came to his mind right as another hush of pink smoke launched into the air with a strong sound. Shinso freed his mind-controlled posse from his quirk by slapping them on their backs. Aoyama and Rikido gazed at each other and around them with confused looks as the purple-haired boy wandered ahead. And that is how Shinso found Izuku digging up mines using a large piece of green metal that he recognized from the first obstacle. Shinso walked up behind him, which made Izuku turn his attention towards his classmate. "Hey, can you help me dig out some of these mines? If you do, I can guarantee you that you will make it through qualifications." Shinso raised an eyebrow before shrugging and beginning to dig out with his hands some of the landmines carefully before slowly adding them to the pile. Izuku continued to dig like a madman using the piece of metal in his arms until a large pile of landmines were gathered. "So what's next?" Shinso asked as he started to think about what he agreed to, and by the looks of Izuku looking back and forth between the landmines and the metal, he had a bad feeling and started to crawl its way up from his stomach. "First things first, do you trust me?" Sure," Shinso replied with a worried tone. "Good." Izuku stuck the piece of metal into the ground with a grin. "Now what's going to happen is basically an amateur reenactment of the Titanic if the icy water was landmines and the door was a piece of metal just big enough to fit 2 people. "I don't like where this is going," Shinso said as he glanced back down at the amount of landmines, regretting the fact that he didn't just walk across the field carefully like everyone else. "Don't be worried, the landmines won't hurt us," Izuku reassured, pulling Shinso towards him. He adjusted Shinso's grip on the straps of the robot piece to double loop around his wrist to make sure it didn't slip from his fingers. Izuku adjusted his own grip while moving the metal piece into position, but the potential fall will. "Now hold on." "Too late," Izuku shouted, dragging Shinso into his side and falling down onto the landmines happily with the robot metal. For a brief moment, Shinso's life flashed before his eyes before he got shot into the clouds like a rocket. Iida gritted his teeth as he skillfully played hopscotch across the minefield, trying his best to avoid the landmines underneath the ground. But right as he dodged another, a huge explosion happened right behind him. He turned around to see that the massive explosion came from the beginning of the field. Iida's gaze turned upwards when he saw 2 figures riding on something solid as it sailed through the pink smoke clouds into the sky. He could hear one of them screeching as the pair soared past him while the other one was laughing. And there was no doubt in his mind that he knew that one that was laughing from the familiar tone, even from high in the air. In fact, Izuku's laughter has become more like his father's the more he grows up. Iida pushed up his glasses and turned his gaze back on the landmines before him. "If I push myself, I might be able to make it through. Can't use the recipro burst now or else I'll stall before I hit the finish line. But if I can just kick it up a notch," Iida said, gearing up his engines. "I'll just drink more orange juice during the break to refuel." With that, Iida took off onto the rest of the field while igniting explosions behind him. Unfortunately, he got caught up in 1 or 2 along the way that slowed his progress. But his running made it possible for some girl students to follow his path by running on the path he left behind with no more landmines. Momo was leading some of the hero course girls down the path with her at the front to guide them through. Hatsume looks up from where she was hovering over the landmines to see her friend sailing above her with someone screaming behind him, clutching onto the edge for dear life. She threw her fist in the air to silently cheer him on while she continued to float, unbothered by the landmines beneath her hoverboots. Behind everyone else, Monoma and other Class 1B students had just shown up at the field when the explosion went off in front of them. Present Mike sputtered over the microphone, "Eraserhead, what are you teaching your kids?" "I did not teach him that," Eraserhead defended himself. And somewhere in the third-year arena, while the third-year students were embarking in their first game, Nedzu looked down at his own personal screen just in time to see his son drag his unsuspecting classmate into the air via landmine's explosion. The audience was left to wonder while frozen in their seats why Nedzu suddenly laughed while the third years were in the middle of their second and third obstacle. "Why did I agree to this?" Shinso yelled into the air while hunched over the piece of metal, scared that if he moved he would fall into more landmines below. Izuku laughed loudly, I don't know. The two sailed over the other students who were trying to tiptoe their way past the field. Shinso's fingers were white from the amount of strength he was using to clench onto the chunk of robot. Slowly, they started to fall towards the ground since they were losing momentum, which made Shinso cry out again since the ground was steadily approaching fast. Izuku narrowed his eyes, forming a plan in his head when he spotted Bakugo and Shoto in the lead, pushing at each other to try and make each other fall onto the landmines. Hold on to me, Izuku demanded, which made Shinso follow orders because he didn't know what would happen if he didn't. While the ground steadily approached, Izuku looped Shinso's limbs into a form of a piggyback position before grabbing hold of one side of the metal piece. Excuse us, Izuku politely shouted, which made both of them look up to see two very differing expressions on Izuku and Shinso's faces. He slammed the robot piece between the two teens in the lead. Boom! With another small blast, the two of them were hot forward into the air once again, while Shoto and Bakugo were caught in the blast. Damn it! Shinso clung tight to anything he could get his hands on so he wouldn't plummet to his death on the second launch, while Izuku continued to look forward to plan their landing. With the ground coming close fast, Izuku prepared to flip the metal to allow them both to roll onto the ground. But suddenly, his plans were interrupted by a small pile of ice and snow forming a ramp from underneath them. Izuku and Shinso braced for impact as the robot metal acted as a sled board. And in a marvelous heroic act from Fukuyama, the ice slide he made broke the fall of both Shinso and Midoriya, Present Mike yelled out over the speakers. Izuku hurriedly got to his feet while Shinso stumbled to find his footing. He looked back to see Shoto with his arms outstretched still in the landmines field. His gaze shifted down to see the long line of ice leading up to the big sliding ramp that broke their fall. Izuku waved back quickly, thanks Sho-chan. He didn't wait to hear a response if Shoto even heard him before grabbing onto Shinso and dragging him behind him towards the finish line. Shinso stops before Izuku can drag him any further. Just go on from here. I'll catch up with you after I feel like I'm not going to die. Are you sure? Izuku asked. Positive. Izuku nodded firmly before taking off sprinting away, glancing back to see that Shinso was taking a much-needed break behind him to catch his breath. He doesn't blame him. One would have that kind of reaction from being blown up to the sky and having to sprint right afterwards. Good, he didn't get hurt, Shoto commented, grateful he helped out his friend before he hit the ground. He knew that Izuku must have had a plan for the landing, but he wanted to make sure that he landed with no trouble. Shoto took a deep breath to ground himself as he warmed himself up from the extensive use of ice he had done so far. He could see Bakugo getting up, which motivated him to freeze his feet to the floor to slow him down. What the? Bakugo shouted out in outrage. Icy hot. Shoto steadied himself before taking off running while he formed an ice path under his feet to protect himself from the landmines. He glanced behind him to see students already looking towards his forming path like it was a shortcut through the minefield. He could hear Bakugo's fiery explosion and the crack of his ice behind him before being drowned out by another explosion of pink smoke. Shinso wheezed as he tried to catch his breath, not paying attention to the icy wind brushing past him or the explosions propelling past him. Wow, exactly what I needed, Shinso weakly protested. Explosions to further the incoming headache. He paused between breaths. Or nausea. Is that nausea? Shinso looked behind him to spot a familiar pink-haired girl that cleared this second barrier using her support items. He could see the crowd of students running towards him, or more accurately to what was waiting behind him, the finish line. Shinso turned back around and started to run again right as the class president from his own class passed right by him using his engines. He pushed himself until he was finally met with the bright lights at the end of the tunnel. Iida Tenya brings up the rear and fourth, followed by Shinso Hitoshi. Oh, thank the gods, Shinso mumbled, moving out of the way of the entrance to catch his breath. He barely cared about who made it afterwards, since all he wanted to do was to get the stadium to stop being blurry. Next time I won't agree to team up with Izuku, Shinso thought to himself while breathing deeply as other students ran past him. After 40 students passed the finish line, the next event was announced by midnight. Shinso was just calming down when Izuku walked up to him with a grin. So are we teaming up for the Cavalry race? What the hell? And the first place winner of the obstacle course round is Midoriya Izuku. Izuku looked up at the use of his full name while the stadium cheered with confetti raining down onto the field. He felt a cold chill hit his back while he immediately noticed the sharp sounds of explosions breeze right past him. Fukuyama Shoto in second place and Bakugo Katsuki in third, Present Mike announced through the giant speakers of the arena. Iida Tenya brings up the rear and fourth, followed by Shinso Hitoshi. Izuku basked in the white noise of the crowd's cheers as he watched everyone rush through the door. All of his classmates made it through along with many from Class 1B. He wasn't surprised to see Hatsume rushing through the doors cackling as she jumped high into the air in celebration. Midnight introduced the next round. Next, everyone that made it past the qualifying rounds will face each other in the Cavalry race. So are we teaming up for the Cavalry race? It will make things so much easier for the later half of the festival, Izuku said as he walked up to the out-of-breath student who was still trying to recover from being launched into the air with little to no warning. You okay there? Shinso stared up at him for a moment like his mind was trying to catch up to whatever was happening while Midnight was still going over the rules of the second round. I have never met anyone quite like you. Why thank you, Midoriya tucked a hair strand behind his ear with a teasing smile on his face. I don't know if you mean it in a bad or good way, but either way is flattering to me. Shinso stared back at him blankly, not quite knowing what to say next. Both of them started to listen more intently at the rules of the second round and how there needed to be a certain number of team members and how the main objective was to capture their headband for points. Midnight added at the end of the rules for the Cavalry race, the person that won first place in the previous round has 10 million points. Izuku could feel the sheer amount of gazes that snapped to him right when the amount of points he had were announced. Shinso gazed back at him with a winced expression. Of course, I expected something like this to be the outcome, Izuku said out loud with a calm smile. Now let's just hope the pros outweigh the cons of having this advantage. Sports Fest Cavalry Race. Izuku-kun, Iida said as he walked up with Shoto at his side, who was looking around as everyone started to find teams away from Izuku. Before I hear anything from you two, yes, I knew the consequences, and yes, I would like you to be on my team because I have a great plan that guarantees success, Izuku says before his friends could say anything in return. Shoto shrugs. Well, that answered all of my incoming questions. Mine as well. So to recap, there is a minimum of 3 players and maximum of 5 players. Hopefully it will end up being even at the end, so it will be better for matchups, Iida explained as he pushed up his glasses. What happens if it's odd? Shoto asked. Izuku answered with a grin. Oh, they will probably drop 1 or add 1 depending on points left over or something like that. Hatsume appeared from seemingly out of nowhere with a bright smile. Hey, Greenie. Hatsume-chan, Izuku greeted before gesturing over to his friend and back to her. Quick introduction since I don't think you have met her yet. Hatsume, these are my friends Iida Tenya, Fukuyama Shoto, and Shinso Hitoshi. This is Hatsume and she is from the support course. She makes a lot of cool inventions and I talked to her about dominating the world a lot. Say what now? Shinso thought to himself for a brief moment while the other two just nodded like that's what they expected to hear. Hatsume laughed wholeheartedly as Izuku looked proud of himself that he found an ally in denomination and destruction. Is this a normal thing? Shinso still looked thrown off for a minute as Hatsume started to ramble with Izuku about the inventions she had at her disposal. Can I snag that final position on the team? You and I both know I need to show off my bobbies, Hatsume asked with an easygoing grin. That depends what kind of bobbies you are showing off this round. Hatsume tilted her head before throwing down a suitcase right in front of him out of nowhere. Well, I made this based on the Pro Hero Airjet's backpack, adding my own original spin on it. Izuku hummed to himself and nodded. Yes, it would work quite well with my plan. And what exactly is your plan? Shinso asked despite the voice in his head telling him to form his own team. Izuku turned his attention towards the teen he shot through the air. I am so glad you asked. Shinso couldn't help but feel a creeping sensation of dread climbing up his spine, even though Izuku's expression read to everyone else as innocent. "Don't worry," Izuku gestured with his hands. "I will make each of you stand out for the sponsors and heroes watching." "What?" Shinso asked with a confused tilt of his head. Shoto informed him, "Oh, that's just the way he is. He'll find some way to make sure we stand out." "But wouldn't that make him stand out less, which is the exact opposite of what you are supposed to do here? If you think he will fade into the background, then you just haven't seen what he is capable of. The first round was only a hint," Iida told him as he pushed up his glasses. "All the teams have been formed with the minimum of 3 and maximum of 5 being reached. Each team has their headbands with the points from what they earned in the previous match," Midnight reiterated to the crowd as the camera panned from each team of students. "Each team has one rider with multiple people holding them up." Izuku was proudly watching the area with Hitoshi on top of all of their shoulders. Izuku was stationed in the back with Mei while Tenya and Shoto were both in front. Hitoshi was sitting down with all of his headbands around his neck. Izuku could see Bakugo had chosen Kirishima, Ashido, Kaminari, and Siro for his team. He could spot Monoma on top of Tetsu, Tsuburaba, Kaibara. Uraraka had Takeami, Ojiro, and Yaoyorozu on her team, and there were many more who were eagerly awaiting for Midnight to start the round. And he also noticed how a lot of groups were staring right at his team. He met their gazes strongly, enjoying himself when he could see one of them flinch back from his unblinking stare. Present Mike counted down from the booth, 3, 2, 1. Izuku tightened his hold on Shinso's pant leg, watching as Shoto's ice started to frost over his right hand. "Start!" Midnight exclaimed. And just like that, multiple UA students were running towards the 10 million point team. Shinso cursed right as Shoto slammed his foot down, creating a huge ice circle around them. The ice walls shot upwards until it formed an igloo structure with a hole at the very top. "This should gain us some time while either they head for breaking the ice or go to face against each other." Shoto glanced back at him. "Just like your plan." Shinso blinked and turned around to see that they accidentally trapped a cameraman into their igloo. "Oh, I think we accidentally got one of the cameraman." Izuku looked back at a man who didn't look surprised to be trapped in ice. He smiled and waved at the camera. "Hi, Papa." They wait for several moments before hearing the sounds of sizzling from one side accompanied by the sounds of explosions. "I think that's our countdown. As soon as they start forming a hole, we shoot up like the plan," Izuku explained as his gaze bounced at different areas of the ice wall. "All we have to do is keep our hands on the 10 million points and we will be good." As expected, Bakugo was making a hole on the northeastern side of the wall, blowing a huge hole in the ice to go through. Shinso looked back at the two behind him. "Now's the time." Mei hit the button, making the backpack on Shinso start to lift them in the air. Mei and Izuku's boots revved up and blasted into the air so the entire team was floating. But it was due to the grip that everyone had on each other that allowed them to float up with almost no problem. Iida revved his engines as Shoto made an impromptu ice ramp. So as soon as Bakugo's team was heading for them, Iida ran up the ramp with the team. They could hear Bakugo's yell as they made their escape through the hole of the igloo easier. Shinso breathed out like he had been holding his breath forever. "I can't believe that worked." "Start believing fast," Izuku remarked back to him as they hurriedly slid down the side of the icy igloo with everyone still distracted. They started to run away from the teams who had not noticed that their team had escaped yet. It lasted longer than they thought as they made it halfway past the field before the other groups turned to see where they had escaped to, since they were no longer in the ice walls. Jiro tried to shoot out her earphone jacks when she got close enough only for Izuku and Hatsume to float up to get a bigger distance. Iida chopped his hands at both of the earphone jacks, with Shoto starting to approach the jacks with his left hand before Jiro retreated from the small fires of Shoto's hand. Izuku spun, making the team turn around to survey the area for any new challengers. "This baby has some excellent mobility," Izuku replied to his friend. Mei grinned excitedly. "That's good." Barely 3 minutes have passed and all the teams are setting their sights on new goals, Present Mike announced. "What happened to my headband?" Hagakura's shout could be heard from where Shinso's team was. Izuku turned around only to quickly look back after realizing she must be naked on the shoulders of Kota and Sato. All of a sudden, they heard the approaching sounds of explosions and turned around to find Bakugo evading straight for them with his explosion blasts guiding him. Shoto intercepted him with an ice wall before he could even reach Shinso. Bakugo sliced down the ice wall with Zero's tape coming up from behind him to yank him back to the team. Present Mike questioned loudly from the booth, was that a risky move? Midnight interjects by adding in, Bakugo Katsuki's move was a technicality, so it is allowed, but if he were to touch the ground, it would be a disqualification. Alright, moving on, let's check out the points. Whoa, it looks like not many Class 1A teams have that many points besides Shinso's team. Bakugo felt a hand swiped right past him, taking the headband off his head with it. He whipped his head around to find a blonde extra looking smug at the fact he has stolen the cloth away from him. He got the headband, Mina pointed out quickly, spotting the headband in Monoma's grip. Give that back or I'll kill your ass, Bakugo threatened. Since Midnight said it was the first game, it would not make sense for them to cut a ton of people in the qualifier, Monoma said, rather than engage directly to the Class 1A team. Bakugo paused for a moment, a curious and confused expression briefly taking over his features. Assuming they keep about 40 people for the next stage, my team and I just made sure we stayed within that number as we ran. I observed from the back in the qualifying round to see just your quirks and your personalities to really understand you all as our rival, Monoma covered his laugh. At least that's better than going after the temporary lead like a child going after the last ice cream. Monoma tapped his chin before suddenly looking like he remembered something out of nowhere. Oh, and while I'm here, I heard you are famous from that little sludge villain incident. Could you tell me about your experience sometime? Dude, how about we stop antagonizing the boom bomb guy, Tetsu suggested from under Monoma. Kirishima, change of plans. Bakugo had a feral grin on his face as he tightened his hands on Kirishima's shoulders. Let's kill all of these extras, especially that blonde guy. And just like that, Bakugo's team headed straight for Monoma's group while yelling the entire time. Bakugo aimed an explosion right at Monoma's face that he dodged like he expected the arm to come at him. Monoma gripped onto his arm before using his opposite hand to send an explosion right at the back of Bakugo's head. Wow, what a cool quirk you got there, Monoma stated as his palms sparked. Bakugo glared at him, temporarily put off by the fact that his own quirk was used against him. Kirishima gasped, Bakugo, there's someone who has the same quirk as you too. I thought I was the only one. Damn you, Bakugo gritted his teeth, the words coming out like a hiss. He ordered his team forward again, sprinting at their team. Bakugo went to attack with an ever bigger explosion, making a huge cloud of ashy smoke erupt from the impact. The smoke cleared to show Monoma with hardened skin exactly like Kirishima's quirk. Nice quirk, Monoma commented, grinning sharply as he blocked the explosion. He looked straight up at the spiky-haired teen. I would argue that mine is better, though. This guy copies quirk, Bakugo said, glancing at his palms. His eyes flickered over to Monoma's hardened skin. Monoma smirked in return. Good to know even an idiot can figure it out. Bakugo snarled right as a wave of a weird substance arched between the two teams, falling over Kirishima's side. Bondo, you're joining the fight, Monoma greeted his fellow classmate. Bondo didn't say anything as he backed up under his rider's orders to avoid the incoming fight to try and attempt to grab at the 10 million points that was passing by. Monoma, we just have to keep away from them. We have enough points to make it to the top 4, Tsuburaba advised. So let's just go before we lose what we have. Monoma nodded his head before instructing his team to leave Bakugo's team behind. Bakugo glared at him, making the blonde glance back at them with a hand raised over his shoulder. Don't hold a grudge or anything about this, okay? Monoma called back cheerfully as his neck was adorned with headbands stolen from them and other teams. His hand sparked up with a small explosion to show off. Bakugo growled, go after them. I can't, Kirishima replied honestly, trying to yank his leg free from the quirk that the Class 1B student used. I'm stuck. I'll melt it, hold still, Mina started before using her own acid to melt the glue substance that was holding her teammate still. Teenagers were relentless. No matter which way they went to avoid the teams, another would be waiting to strike. Hatsume and Izuku were using the hover boots to softly ascend from the ground to make avoiding the grabbing hands easier. When they softly landed on the ground away from most of the teams, Ojiro spotted them and took the only chance she had to strike them while they were vulnerable. Now Kaminari. Kaminari let loose with his electricity from the direct order of Ojiro, who was waiting for it. He grinned before unleashing a huge shocking attack on all the teams nearby, inducing Shinso's team. The only team mostly unaffected was Uraraka's team because Momo made an insulation blanket right on time. 6 minutes left, Shoto stated while freezing the teams in place once again to gain time, but most of them saw it coming and were already making their way out using their quirks. We can't stop now. The backpack's acting up, Izuku pointed out, making Shinso glances back at them. Oh baby, Hatsume frowned, still looks like there is room for improvement. Just then Uraraka's team was heading towards them with dark shadows slithering their way. Shinso called out to Takami with a somber expression, when I was a young boy. My father, Takami tried to return before cutting himself off. Attack the team next to you, Shinso ordered. Iida took the lead to get themselves away from the grabbing hands. Takami made Dark Shadow swipe a headband off another team who immediately went after Uraraka's team to take it back. Momo created a shield to protect her teammates from the attacks made by Tsunotori's team. Uraraka was doing relatively well as a group leader given the fact she has never had a leadership role in her life, but she knew that her parents were watching her back home. She couldn't let them see her chicken out in the second round by not getting enough points. Takami, come on, Uraraka sighed, nudging Takami on his shoulder from where she sat. Takami blinked. Excuse me, what happened? Ojiro piped up from behind Takami. It was Shinso's quirk. But good news, you stole a headband and got us even more points. How many points do we have so far? Yaoyorozu asked, glancing up at Uraraka who was tightening the headbands around her neck and forehead. Over 500, Uraraka commented, her eyes flashing up at the scoreboard. Not enough, we are in 6th place, so we have to get more. Uraraka surveyed the area, noticing how Bakugo and another blonde looked like they were about to have some soft or altercation. Quick, go near Bakugo. We can steal a headband from the other guy since he will have his attention somewhere else. Good eyes, Yaoyorozu commented, changing forward with Takami. Right as Bakugo started to yell, the other blonde's attention was drawn to him. And that's when they trike, taking one of their headbands from around the blonde's neck. Ojiro hits his tail into the metal guy to stop him from attacking their team. But right after they got another headband, other Class 1B teams started to head towards them to get points. Kendo reacted with her team, reaching out with her big hand to try to rip the headband off her forehead. Dark Shadow reacted to her hand by pulling at it and biting at her fingers to keep her from trying again. Momo sliced through Shizusaki's vines with a created knife she pulled out from the exposed skin of her neck. Uraraka can still hear Bakugo even from her position, which gave her an idea from one of his previous attacks. She touched her hand against her head and started to float herself up. Cover me. Ojiro swiped his tail against a waist as Uraraka successfully floated towards Kendo to attempt to steal more points. Dark Shadow helped her block any attempts to knock her back with Kendo's hand or Shizusaki's vines. Uraraka quickly gripped onto Kendo's headband around her forehead before propelling her body back over her team. Release, she called, her team catching her carefully. The team ran away from Kendo's team immediately while Kendo called out after them. Woo, now that was fun. Uraraka looked up to the scoreboard to see that they had climbed up to 4th place. Ojiro's tail fuzzed up as he noticed more teams closing in. All right, let's just keep it there. Wow, we are really pulling ahead. We even got 2nd place, Monoma commented, happy that it was going great for him and his team. Everything is really falling into place for Class 1B. Subiraba pouted, don't jinx it. Hey you blonde extra. Never mind, too late, Kaibara said, his dark eyes looking back to see the fiery red gaze of Bakugo and his team running after them. Bakugo launched himself from his team and took to the air again to attack them, his hands blasting off explosions to propel himself like a rocket towards them. "Don't act on your own, Bakugo," Zero called out, running towards the angered blonde with the rest of the team members. Mina laughed as soon as she saw the scared expression on Monoma's face. "Subioraba," Monoma called out as Bakugo got too close. "Got it!" Subioraba blew into the air, turning it solid just as Bakugo went crashing into it, his face smashed against the invisible wall made of air. Bakugo raised his hand back and smashed through the solid air with his explosions, making the air break like glass. Monoma's eyes widened as Bakugo stole back the headband he stole from them. Bakugo breaks through walls and yanks on headbands. Zero immediately wrapped Bakugo in his tail before he could hit the ground and dragged him back. "I told you to tell me ahead of time when you are going to jump, and what do?" Zero shouted, yanking Bakugo back to his team with his tape. "We got our points back," Bakugo argued back instead of answering Zero directly. "Now let's head for 10 million points." Monoma cursed himself for allowing 2 people from Class 1A to steal headbands from him. He barely had enough to finish in the top 4. They needed to get more and more quickly. "Run!" he shouted at his teammates to run faster to get away from the Raging Blonde's team behind them. He looked behind him to see Bakugo had chosen to go after the leading team. But his worries weren't over yet when opposing teams made up of his Class 1B teammates were heading straight for him, desperate to get any points because they didn't have much. Subioraba saw them coming and blocked Tsunotori's horn attack aimed at them. Monoma blew away Bondo before he could use his quirk to stick them into one place. Monoma quickly used Subiorba's sold air quick to block a quick attempt by another team who was reaching to grab onto Kaibara's shirt. Monoma swiftly stole another headband which read 295 points to add to the pile around his neck. He stole a glance up to the scoreboard to check what they had. "Focus on evading from now on. The time is running out, so the other teams are getting desperate." "You think?" Kaibara sassed, sweeping the leg of a classmate who got too close. Tetsu charged forward, launching a steel fist to pound into Bondo's face, who tried to steal one of their headbands again. "We got this." Shinso called out to one of the boys on a team acting as the horse of the rider on top. "Hey, just curious, ever heard the mockingbird sing?" Sato looked taken aback. "What?" "Stop in your tracks," Shinso called out as a command, making Sato stop fully, which made Hagakure call out to him since she almost slipped from his shoulders. "Almost got it, only 2 minutes left," Izuku called out encouragingly. Shinso smiled back at him, guiding the team over to Shoto's previous ice igloo that had multiple cracks and holes in the walls from teams making their way inside. "Come here, you nerds," Bakugo called out, his team charging at them. Shoto glanced back at the rest of the team. "Any plans?" "Izuku, switch places with me. I have a move that I have been practicing," Iida says with confidence. Izuku switched places with his friend hurriedly right as he heard Uraraka's battle cry from not that far away from their position. "All right, everyone, hang on to me. It's going to be fast," Iida states, gearing up his engines. With teams fast approaching, everyone shot their arms forward to grip onto Iida's shirt, with Shinso's being the strongest. Shoto shot his left arm out to melt the remaining igloo walls while Iida revved his engines. Bakugo shot forward again, much to Zero's displeasure, right as Iida used his engines to shoot himself and his team far away from their grabbing hands. It all happened so fast that no one had time to shout. They could only hang tight to his shirt, no matter how awkward it was for the two in front to navigate their arms behind their backs. Izuku looked behind him to see a long trail of dirt clouds from the running special move that Iida just did. He slowly turned back to stare directly at the blue-haired teen who was catching his breath. "Wow," Izuku complimented, eyes shining with admiration. "That was amazing, Ten-chan." Tenya smiled back at his old friend. "Thanks, it makes me stall afterwards, so I was saving it for the right time." Shoto tilted his head back to address his friend. "How long have you been working on it?" "For a while on my own. I never got to show it off before now," Iida replied. Right as the timer hit 0, everything stopped. Bakugo face planted on the ground from his failed attempt to get the headband. Uraraka slowly retracted her hand back from swiping another headband off of Monoma's team. Times UP, present Mike called right as the timer hit 0. Eraserhead leaned the opposite way from Mike as he shouted, his bandages shifting sound with the movement. The crowd went wild as the scoreboard started to tally up the final scores. Most looked up with hope while others shrugged since they had no headbands with points to count. Present Mike cheered from the announcer's booth as a stream of confetti burst out from the speakers below the booth. First place goes to Shinso's team, with over 10 million points. Wow, we did it, we actually did it, Shinso said almost to himself as he gazed at the cheering stands. Woo, my bobbies got their spotlight, Hatsume pumped both her fists in their air repeatedly. Iida grabbed both of his friends in a group hug to celebrate their win. Izuku's laughter filled the nearby air, making Shinso look up just in time to see Hatsume grab him to lift him off the air in a hug. He made a choked noise from being lifted in the air by a surprisingly strong girl accompanied by the cheers of their team. Second place is Bakugo Katsuki's team. We did it! Bakugo squatted and hit the ground with a controlled explosion in his fist. Zero asked with a grin, are you alright? We weren't number 1, Bakugo answered loudly with a grumpy expression, angry at himself for not getting the 10 million headband before the time ran out. It's close enough for me, Mina added. As long as we get to show off our stuff to the heroes, who cares? Third place is Monoma team. Tetsu pumped his fists in the air while Tsuburaba high-fived Kaibara. Monoma smirked to himself, proud of the chance that Class 1B was making their mark. The rest of their classmates clapped for their achievement. Kendo clapped her big hand against Monoma's back, throwing him forward from the sheer force. Fourth place is Uraraka Chako's team. Ojiro jumped in the air by bouncing off his tail while Uraraka almost floated herself away because she wasn't paying attention to how she placed all her fingers to her face out of the shock that they had made it through. Dark Shadow grabbed her before she floated off while Yaoyuruzu clapped gracefully from their shared win. Ojiro high-fived Uraraka, almost floating off himself before Yaoyuruzu created a piece of rope and captured him before he flew up too far. And Kaminari Denki has been added by the number of individual points he has to even out the battle numbers. Yes, Kaminari cheered happily, little static shocks lighting up in his hair from his excitement. To give the staff time to prepare the round for the battle stage, everyone may take a break for the halftime, Midnight announced with an inviting smile. Get some snacks while you wait and enjoy the entertaining games you can participate in during this time. Nedzu continued to watch from a small screen to overview his son's second round, swinging his feet as he watched his son's team win. He clapped his paws together as he watched over the third year's second round, which was the equivalent of an overpowered version of tug-of-war. One of the cameramen swiveled the camera away to avoid the overly happy gaze of the principal on film. Izuku didn't know how he ended up in a random hallway far from the lunch area with a smoothie and Shinso. Well, he did know. Shinso had told him that they needed to talk before dragging him to an empty area. So why did you drag me over here? Izuku asked while sipping on a large smoothie that he had just got before Shinso pulled him away from the others. Why are you being so nice to me? Shinso questioned. Pardon, Izuku asked, confused, pulling away from the straw. I don't really write fight scenes that often since I don't really like writing them. Anyway, I hope the fights in this are good. This took forever because at first I went with Canon, but I just threw that out of the window. Confrontation and DJ Mouse. Shinso opened and closed his fists as he continued to stare at the other teen. Is it because you are the principal's kid and you want me on your side for some reason? Izuku's expression still looked confused as he stared at Shinso. Why would you think that? Look, I've been through a lot to recognize that when a student is being too overly friendly or nice to me, that it's not a good thing. I don't know what your plan is, but I won't be your scapegoat or tester, Shinso ranted. I've seen it before where I think someone is trying to be a friend to me only to find out they're just going to throw me under the bus or blame me for something they did. So you don't think I'm being genuine? No, yes, Shinso shook his head before placing his hand on his forehead. I'm conflicted since I don't really know how to read you. You seek me out in the classroom more than the other classmates we have. Then I get shot through the sky with little warning. And then I got invited into your team and we worked really well together. And I want to believe that it's all real this time, but I just can't. So I want to know now once and for all, just don't lie to me and tell me honestly, because I have been through situations like this before, Shinso replied, thinking back to the rough times in middle school before he got to UA. Everything goes great until one moment where it all changes. Shinso, Izuku said, staring right into Shinso's eyes and not directing his gaze anywhere else. I am being completely honest when I say that I want you to be my friend. If you need to confirm further, you can use your quirk on me like a lie detector to see if I am being truthful. Shinso looked like he was considering it, while Izuku continued to explain his side. I didn't have that many growing up except Sho-chan and Ten-chan, Izuku said, eyes trailing the hallway. He paused and looked at the corner like someone was waiting there before turning back to him. And I was homeschooled, so I didn't have that many people my age to interact with, so I wanted to make new friends with all of my classmates. But what about outside of school? Well, I did make one friend my age who went to another hero school from the entrance exams. But other than that, no, Izuku shrugged, looking down at his hands. Because when you find out just how many people are still against quirkless people even after so long, you stop hopping to make new friends that way. Shinso's eyes widened. What? Izuku looked back up. I'm quirkless. But Shinso blinked hard like he was still comprehending what was going on. How? When I was born, I got an extra bone in my foot. Shinso waved him off. No, not that. Just what? Why are you telling me this? I'm going to tell the class sooner or later, but when you were going off on discrimination, I just wanted to set the record straight that we are on a mostly level playing field, Izuku answered, moving the straw up and down absent-mindedly. He gestured with his hand between the both of them. You got bullied for having a villain quirk, and I got discriminated against for being quirkless. How many people know about you being quirkless? No one else really knows besides my family, the staff, and my close friends, Izuku answered with a small, sad smile. And everyone in the school except the first years only knows that I am the principal's son, but most of them just assume I have an intelligence quirk because of my analysis. They don't even know me that well to know I am quirkless. Shinso thought back to how close he looked with the other team member from the support course, the support girl. Hatsume-chan, Izuku nodded. Yeah, I told her that offhandedly when she wanted to fit me for rocket-powered shoes, but I had to inform her about how she had to get them custom-fitted or use a specific brand because, you know. The extra toe joint. Yep, when she realized why our friendship didn't change, Izuku smiled, deep in thought, and how grateful he was that her attitude towards him didn't change in the slightest. It was like he was statting the weather to her when he told her the truth. She accepted him wholeheartedly before going off on a tangent about her new bobbies. In fact, I think I just gave her more ideas of what support items she can make. How did it work out with your dad being Nedzu and all that? Like your experience with school must have been even worse than mine. Not really, Izuku shook his head. On my first day of elementary school, he pulled me out when they started to bully me, and he started to homeschool me from then on. Wait, I almost forgot that your dad is the principal. You were homeschooled. Izuku nodded as he sucked up his strawberry smoothie up the straw. He mumbled to himself, Ooh, I'm so glad I got the strawberry. Nedzu, the most intelligent animal alive. Yep. Okay, I think that answers some other questions. Shinso scratched the back of his head. So what happened after that? Oh, Izuku started to think about the consequences, counting off from the fingers on one of his hands. He reformed the school, got the teachers fired, and got restraining orders against the kids. Shinso looked taken aback. Say what? Yeah, Izuku smiled before taking another long sip for his smoothie. He is a little protective over me. No kidding, Shinso agreed. Restraining orders. I mean, they should be over legally by now unless I need to review the laws again, but they never really got renewed since the problem was solved and everything. And the reform actually helped a lot of schools harden down on the bullying act. Shinso commented, not with mine. I could guess from what you told me. Izuku took a sip before sobering up. His sharp gaze turned towards Shinso. So what's the name of the school again? What? Shinso asked, looking up to see an unfamiliar expression on Izuku's face that made him look scary from how blank his face was. Izuku shook his head, the blank expression fading into a relaxed smile. Never mind, I'll look into it. It's probably on your file anyway. You don't need to do that, Shinso waved him off. I'm here now and that's all that matters. Izuku didn't look that reassured before he glanced up above Shinso's head for a brief moment. Izuku looked at Shinso and said, I will take your word on it for now. Shinso breathed out, too relieved to notice how the security camera lens above him focused in on their interaction for a brief moment. Good, but hey, why would you have access to student files? Do you have permission to use it? Izuku shook his head. I don't have steady access to it unless a specific student asked me to do analysis on them or another time when it's time to bring in new students. Even then, I would still ask permission to view specific profiles from Papa. You mean you have access during the entrance exam time? Shinso asked. Izuku tilted his head. Who do you think was in charge of the second chance program? You. Shinso's eyes widened. His mouth opened and closed for a brief moment where he didn't know what to say before he gestured at him with his hand. You are responsible for me getting in here. Yes, Izuku replied easily before he sighed. Well, technically I recommend students that have been overlooked and the staff decides to see if you have potential from there. Although it has worked out most of the time, I pick really good potential hero students so they find no reason to reject them. Shinso looked at him after a pause with an astonished expression. And you just come up to them and say that? If they ask who chose them, then yes. Izuku held up a finger as he slurped from his smoothie. If they don't ask, there is no need for me to come out and say it. But this time was a bit different. I hope that tidbit of information doesn't make you feel like you need to make up for it or anything. No, but it doesn't mean that I'm not thankful for it. Without that program, I would have just been in general education, probably fighting for the spot during this festival, Shinso answered as he looked up at the ceiling. But I wouldn't let that information influence my choice. I already knew when we started this talk about what my decision would be when I found out the truth. Izuku hesitated before asking the purple-haired teen across from him. He stretched out his hand towards the boy. So, are we friends? Yeah, Shinso grinned back at him, stretching out his own hand to grasp Izuku's in a strong handshake. Why not? Izuku looked up at the camera briefly before realizing how much time should have passed by now. Oh, see you later. I need to go talk with my uncle before the battles begin. Shinso raised an eyebrow. See you at the battles then. Let's hope they don't pit us against each other, Izuku smiled. You should be worried if that were the case. Bakugo stopped leaning against the wall and started to quietly walk away from the conversation. He looked around the hall and stared directly into a camera that appeared trained on him for a moment before continuing to pan down the hall. Bakugo continued to travel back to the lunch area to find something spicy, glancing back at the area where they were talking. Who knew that when you were trying to find the bathroom, you would end up overhearing somebody's trauma? Present Mike tapped into his microphone. Hey, all viewers and listeners, I would like to present my surprise guest, DJ Mouse. Hey listeners, viewers, and headshakers. It is I, DJ Mouse, Izuku greeted. He had shoved a black hoodie on top of his uniform. The hood was pulled over his signature green curls and a spare face mask from Recovery Girl, and he had on surgical gloves as well to hide from the cameras looking into the booth. Present Mike let him borrow a pair of his sunglasses to hide his eyes from the world just in case people looked into who exactly had green eyes in the contestants. Ooh, working on an intro, I see, Mike commented, throwing up his eyebrows at his nephew. Don't get used to it, DJ Mouse pulled his mask to make sure it covered his nose. It's only because it's a special occasion and that occasion is the UA Sports Festival. That is correct, Present Mike replied with a more toned-down voice. So you want to tell the listeners what you are here for? Well, I'm just here to go over the highlights of the last 2 rounds during this lovely halftime, and possibly provide some commentary for the halftime games that the students are doing right now. Did you know the people in the audience and watching at home can see you now for the first time? Present Mike said, gesturing over to the outside of the booth window. Ah yes, my debut while I am still costumed, DJ Mouse replied, tugging at the long black hoodie over his sports uniform. He waved out the window to where a camera was pointing directly into the booth. Hello, world. So let's start by reviewing some of the highlights. First up is the obstacle course of the first round, Present Mike announced as a screen in front of them played through some of the clips from the first round. What do you think, DJ Mouse? Mouse laughed. It was very entertaining to watch how the students were trying to navigate through the obstacles, especially through the first one. The robots. No, I'm talking about the narrow door at the very beginning of it, DJ Mouse replied. I would consider that the real first obstacle because of how hard it was to pass through it when you had such a large amount of people blocking it. How about those robots? Present Mike asked as a clip played with the students using their quirks to fight their way through. They were the same models used for the hero course entrance exam. I do love how everyone reacted to them. DJ Mouse tightened his gloves by pulling them further up his wrist. The hero course students just started to move while everyone else was freaking out about the giant robots like they were dropped into a horror and science fiction movie. Present Mike laughed at that, looking back at the paused clip to show the shocked faces of the gathered students. I enjoyed it from the booth with my lively announcing partner who is currently on lunch right now. Because you forced him out to get lunch, DJ Mouse added with a grin under his mask. He would have slurped up juice packets if I didn't, Present Mike quipped back. He slurped up the smoothie that Izuku had stopped on his way to get for him. I can't argue with that because I knew he would, DJ Mouse replied knowingly. Anyway, what did you think of that dangerous-looking second round? Mike threw his head back, tilting his head while his chair spun around to look back at the television. Ooh, it had me almost worried for the participants from how high those pillars were. I could see a lot of students struggling with that one from the amount of time it took to cross each rope to the next pillar. I would say that it was only enjoyable to watch when people passing through used other methods besides the rope, like for Suitsuyu hopping from each pillar onto the rope before crawling forward, or when Hatsume from the support course to show off her inventions. DJ Mouse commented as the video rolled back of the footage from that stage. I liked it when others seemed to follow suit in that regard by using their own quirks or teaming with others to get across more efficiently than just crawling over the rope. He could see Momo making a cannon just for her to crawl inside and shoot herself over a few pillars, and right before she landed, she made a parachute to land safely onto the pillars. Excellent landing, DJ Mouse added as the video moved on to the last obstacle of the first round. And the landmines are next, Mike sent a knowing look towards him, thinking back to his nephew's surprise stunt to get past the landmines. DJ Mouse, would you say this was your favorite obstacle? Yes, it was interesting to watch the students try to navigate the landmines field, especially with their quirk, DJ Mouse commented as he watched the recap with Uncle Mike. Iida was struggling a bit at first until he found the speed he needed to avoid most of the explosions. Earlier, he was getting covered in the pink smoke with almost every attempt. I think the move I didn't see coming was directly from two Class 1A students using the explosions as a launching pad, Present Mike said, looking at him with a teasing glint in his eyes. Speaking of that move, DJ Mouse smiled, pulling out his phone. Let me just point out that people have already started to make the short video a meme on social media. Present Mike's grin grew, leaning forward away from the microphone to check out what his nephew was about to show them. Are you serious, DJ Mouse? I am not kidding, Mike. DJ Mouse scrolled down on his phone with the Sports Festival tag that was currently trending. I'll just read from the Sports Festival trending tag with a post that reposted a screenshot of the video from the obstacle course. Alternate ending of Rose pulling Jack onto the door and blasting through the icy water. Mike burst out into laughter when Izuku tilted his phone at the hero. Or this one that has reposted the video with the song quote, I can show you the world. Oh yeah, this is my kind of humor, Mike added loudly. What have you got to say about the second round, the Cavalry race? Oh, that was a real nail-biter. I could barely keep track of who had their headbands still. Everything went by so fast, oh but it was so thrilling to watch it go down, Mouse responded, gesturing wildly with his hands as he pointed around the booth. Groups going this way, people flying that way, headbands were just bouncing between teams at some point. I can only imagine with your view of it. I was all the way up in the booth and I still couldn't completely track all the movements, Mike said. DJ Mouse held up his hands as he stated his opinion. I have got to say that the move Monoma pulled was a very smart play. I completely agree, Present Mike nodded with a smile. With everyone distracted on the big prize, no one would pay attention to the teams sneaking their points away. Exactly, DJ Mouse added. Anything to say about the little halftime games that are currently going on down below? Present Mike asked, gesturing down to the small games going in below. I wished I could have taken part of the scavenger hunt because I love to hunt, DJ Mouse sighed. Was it a riddle of just a list of items? Just items, no riddle given. Ah, I was always given riddles when I did scavenger hunt games. Let's review some of the items they had to find. DJ Mouse watched as Monoma was dragged by Kendo. Oh, it looks like Monoma was one of the answers to the list. Not exactly, it just said on the list to find a male classmate, and he was the closest one who wasn't already participating, Present Mike replied easily, viewing the students who were. Well, there's only some time left before they finish setting up the battles, Present Mike announced while looking at the clock. Unfortunately, we must bid you adieu for now, DJ Mouse. Thank you for joining me during the halftime break. Thank you for inviting me. DJ Mouse rose out of his seat and waved to the booth window. See you later, listeners. UA Sports Festival 20XX Live First Year State. Comments. Murdiandebat, did no one notice how Nedzu was acting in the third-year stage? Don't like thinking, at Murdiandebat, what are you doing watching the third-year students? Gang Orca under Thesia, yeah, the first-year students has that one infamous class from that attack. Unicorn cat flying away, why are you guys putting more attention on the high school students that literally got attacked within the first week of school? Getin Sebaquina baby, they are in the hero course, if anything that was practice for what they are getting into. Reposted by All Might Clipping Cheeks. GIF, two boys on a piece of metal skyrocketing through the air. One looked like they were on a magic carpet ride while the other looked like he was on a roller coaster to his doom. An explosion of pink smoke behind them as they sailed through a blue sky. Me when I drag my friend on my favorite ride at the park. Hawks number own chicken tender, me avoiding school with my bestie. Reposted by Bisgenus Gotham Applebot MGNs. Image of two boys on top of a piece of metal sailing through air with a pink explosion behind them. Words written on pink explosions that spelled out responsibilities. Gaming written over the green-haired boy's face while the purple-haired boy had me written on his face. Me but with cartoons instead of gaming. Stressed for the dress. Screenshot of the inside of the announcer booth. Present Mike sitting next to a disguised DJ Mouse. DJ Mouse had his hood pulled up, face mask, and gloves. God, I can only imagine what DJ Mouse looks like. Comments. MT laid a step on me, he is smaller than I thought, I wonder how tall he is. Presentation Mitchie, I think he just said on one of his shows that he was just average height, so he isn't like 6 feet tall yet. Octopus hugs are the best, yeah, he is still like a teen, so he still has room to grow. Intruder in her house, how tall will he grow? I saw shaved as baby. Screenshot of flat-screen television of green-haired boy being picked up by a pink-haired girl and sailing over tall pillars over a dark abyss. This is friendship goals right here, being able to carry your bestie across an abyss. I would do it for my bestie who is also my roommate. Sleep is overrated, they were roommates. Ice shaved ice baby, oh my god they were roommates 0. DJ Mouse is the only mouse I stand posted. Reminder to all my friends and followers, I will only be talking about DJ Mouse's appearance at the sports festival. Thread. To start off his first appearance other than over the radio, I did not expect it to happen but I have been waiting for it. Love the commentary, make him comment with Present Mike on everything. I would order an audiobook of both of them just commentating on the book instead of actually reading the book out loud. Official request to have his official hero name be DJ Mouse since he already has fan base around it. To all the followers, you should know how DJ Mouse has already said that he is in UA and is a first year. So I can only assume he went there for hero course, so I will try and find them during this sports festival. And if I don't, then WGAF, I said what I said. So if he finds me and wants me to stop, I will, simply because I feel like he has a lot of connections. After the little break with his uncle, Izuku headed out to get a drink before making his way to the stadium for the battles beginning soon. He had dumped his disguise for DJ Mouse into the room where Eraserhead was resting. His gaze landed on 3 pro heroes that were undoubtedly called in for the extra security. But when he saw exactly who they were, he was reminded of the day he had first met Bakugo, during the sludge villain attack while those 3 were limited in helping him. He smiled as he walked up enjoying his Kamui woods and Death Arms slowly turned in his direction and froze when they saw him. Mount Lady waved her hand in front of their faces before turning to see the teenager walking towards them. He didn't place much blame on Mount Lady since she was controlling the crowd at the time, but the other 2 were still on his watch list. Why hello, Izuku said with a smile, watching how 2 of the pro heroes tensed once they saw him. Death Arms waved with one hand stiffly while Kamui Woods let out a choked greeting that sounded like his throat became hard wood. Mount Lady waved a bit to greet him with a clear greeting. Mount Lady looked like she didn't recognize him. "Hi kid, what are you doing back here? Battle round is about to start." "Oh yes, that's why I was coming back. I was just checking on some people I know," Izuku said in return. "And what brings you all here today?" "We are acting as needed security since this is a huge event and all that." "Ah, I see. Well, I'm glad you got called in. I've been watching since your debut, and might I just say I think you're doing quite well," Izuku said with a kind smile. Mount Lady listened with interest while the two others slowly backed away from his view. "If there was anything that happened, I'm sure you would have it solved with your expertise in no time." Mount Lady placed a hand on her chest. "Why, thank you. That's the first time anyone has really said that. Mostly I just get comments about my uniform." Izuku paused for a moment then shrugged. "Well, I like the color of your hero costume." Mount Lady chuckled. "Thank you. Anyway, you should really start heading to the field since I think they are about to announce it soon." "Thank you for your help," Izuku said honestly before walking quickly past the pro hero. Kamui Woods and Death Arms didn't relax until he was fully out of sight. "Awa, he was so sweet. He was such a little gentleman," Mount Lady said with a posed hand under her chin. She turned around to see both of the male heroes that were teamed with her hiding behind a pillar. "Why are you hiding behind the pillar? I can still see you, so it's pointless." Kamui Woods poked his head out from behind the pillar. "No reason." "Come on, what's got you so worked up?" Mount Lady asked, hands on her hip from how difficult they were being. "Do you not remember?" Death Arms stressed. "That was Nedzu's kid." "Oh," Mount Lady said before her eyes widened from recognition of who was talking with her just a moment ago. "Oh. We're in trouble," Kamui Woods commented, pressing himself against the cold wall. "No, you're in trouble," Mount Lady replied, pointing a finger at them before gesturing to herself. "I think he likes me." "Sure, whatever you say," Death Arms responded with a blank stare while Kamui simultaneously tried to make himself become more of a tree to hide. "What?" Mount Lady out her hand on her hips. "Do you think I'm unlikable?" "No, never," Kamui Woods said, looking at the time. "Let's get to our seats, though." Quick Halloween special. It all happened when Izuku was only 7 years old. Nedzu had scheduled out the entire night of Halloween for the children to trick and treat safely just like normally. Izuku had decided to dress up as his father for Halloween since he found it funny just how so many people were scared of his father. Shoto was dressed in a Peter Pan costume complete with a green cap on red and white hair. Iida had a cardboard box around him with multiple colored buttons drawn in marker. Fayumi was dressed as a fairy with fake wings and pastel-colored dress that flowed to her ankles. Natsuo had just drawn a pair of whiskers on his cat and put a cat ear headband on. He was dressed in all gray to pretend he was a gray tabby cat. Taoya has drawn scales along his face and had leathery-like black wings. He told everyone he was dressed as a dragon. Nedzu was guiding them on their regular trick-or-treating route when Izuku had accidentally bumped into someone. When suddenly a bright flash from the small impact consumed the trick-and-treating group. Nedzu blinked and watched as the teens started to run after he bumped into them. He turned back around only to feel his fur standing on edge at seeing what happened to the group. The teens' quirk wasn't some random light, it turned the group into what they were dressed as. Taoya stood over all of them, taller than a house on 4 legs. His scaled snout looked around in a frenzy with smoke leaking out his nostrils. Taoya growled in the air, making a lot of the children around them scared. A cat meowed by Nedzu's feet. He looked down to see a familiar-looking gray tabby and simultaneously noticed how Natsuo wasn't around. "Taoya, Natsuo, what's happening?" a high-pitched sound questioned. Fayumi appeared in his sight, except she was as small as a hummingbird with wings fluttering behind her. "I do not appreciate this," Iida's voice said with a robotic undertone to his words. Iida looked like a silver robot from space with colored buttons on his chest. He stiffly walked forward like he had no flexibility in his joints. Nedzu looked down to see that he still had his engines on his calf. Peter Pan Shoto turned in the air to see his shadow trying to run away from him. "Oh no, my shadow, it's escaping." Iida waddled towards him to attempt and help his friend keep his shadow under control. Natsuo trotted up to them and launched himself on Shoto's back to grab onto the living shadow. Papa! Nedzu's eyes furrowed at the weird tone that sounded very familiar to his own voice. Slowly, he looked towards his own son to see himself staring back at him, except his clone's fur was a light green that matched his son's hair. I think we might need some help. Nedzu nodded back at his son, surveying him from head to toe. The quirk really turned his son into a version of him. He pulled out his phone and called someone he knew would come as quickly as they could. Eraserhead, yes, I need your assistance with something, Nedzu said into the cell phone. The children have been turned into their costumes from a quirk. Hello, Uncle Eraser, Izuku said using Nedzu's familiar tone of voice. Yes, that was Izuku. Indeed, he was dressed like me when the quirk hit him. Yes. See you then, Nedzu replied with a smile. He turned to the transformed children. He'll be here right away. Taoya exhaled another plume of smoke from his nose, causing Fayumi to shriek as her tiny form was covered in ash. Eraserhead arrived shortly after to help, freezing at the sight of two Nedzis staring back at him. His attention was briefly on Natsuo since he was a cat before calling in the police to help track down the person responsible. Luckily, officers were on duty for Halloween night for any tricks that anyone could pull. So within half an hour, the teen responsible was captured and brought to Eraserhead so they could deactivate the quirk. Before they did though, Nedzu made Eraserhead take a picture of all of them transformed to remember the infamous night. The teen got in trouble of course, but not for anything major since they didn't mean any harm to the trick they pulled, since the transformation was only temporary and didn't cause any damage to them at all. With Eraserhead's stare, the children were back to their human forms. Taoya was on all fours when the smoke cleared, making him shoot straight up. Fayumi sighed in relief once her wings became fake again. Natsuo yawned and scratched his head. Finally back to my old self. Izuku tilted his head when he noticed his friend clenching onto the sides of his box. Iida, are you okay? I don't want to be a robot anymore. Iida looked sadly down at the box around him. Shoto patted his back to comfort him while Izuku frowned down at the robot costume. Swiftly, Taoya pulled out a Sharpie out of his jacket, which drew the attention of his siblings towards him. I can fix that, Taoya added. Taoya, Fayumi raised her brow. Why do you have a marker on you? Taoya held a finger to his lips. That's a secret. Must be for marker mustaches, Natsuo whispered to his sister. Shut it or else you are getting the first one of the night, Taoya threatens quietly before walking up to the blue-haired boy with his marker. Taoya flipped the box around and started to draw on the box. How about a race car since you go so fast? That sound good? Iida nodded with a grin while Taoya got to work changing his costume while Shoto kept turning around to look at his own shadow to make sure it was still there. Thank you, Uncle Zawa, Izuku thanked the pro hero who turned around to face his nephew. He was dressed in his regular hero costume except his pants were gray instead of the regular black shade he wore. He must have been in a rush once he heard what had happened. No problem, kid, I better get back soon, Aizawa replied, ruffling his hand through Izuku's normal curls. He waved goodbye to the group. Have a fun night. Bye, Uncle Zawa, Shoto, Izuku and Iida yelled back in tantrum as Taoya finished up the new look on the cardboard box. With a last flick of the marker, Taoya capped it. Tada, now you are a race car. Ingenium Racing number 2, Shoto read aloud as Iida admired the drawn artwork on his new and improved costume. It had 2 circle headlights on either side with lines indicating the front of the car. It even had a bumper drawn near the bottom. Iida's eyes sparkled behind his glasses. Thank you. No need to thank me, Taoya said, messing up Iida's combed hair with his hand. Iida protested his hair being tangled up while Taoya stood up. Now then, back to the candy. Nedzu walked back from the policeman who took his statement. Yes, now thanks over with, we can continue our night of pleasantries. Yes, Natsuo cheered with both of his hands thrusted into the air. I want to get more popcorn balls. Fayumi turned to her brother, the sparkles and gems on her face sparkling in the nighttime lights. You know you can have mine, Natsuo. Yeah, but I crave more, Yumi, Natsuo pouted as they began to walk behind Nedzu once again with the smaller children in front of them. Intermission, Rocklock special delivery. Rocklock was happy about being a new dad, but he wasn't exactly happy about having to go to the office to pick up some paperwork while his wife was home with their newborn. She reassured him that she had it all handled and that he was free to go get the needed paperwork. She kissed him goodbye at the door before he left and raised their little son's hand to wave him goodbye. He was still off on paternity leave for at least another month until he could get his family settled down enough for him to come back full-time. So all he had to do was get the paperwork, and get out to go back home. Maybe he could pick up some of his wife's favorite fast food on the way back. Rocklock thought about the good soba place around the corner while he walked into his own pro-hero office. It wasn't as big as the more popular heroes, but it was a relatively good place to house his sidekicks and his business workers. The walls were painted with murals that were different from any cream walls or dark colors that other pro heroes had in their agency. "Oh sir, you're back," one of the sidekicks spoke out, making more eyes turn to him. He walked past their cubicles that were decorated in their own style. One of his favorites was one decorated with black, orange, and red colors. "You're back too early." "I just came to pick up some paperwork, that's all," Rocklock replied, raising a hand to wave at the workers before heading inside his office. He walked into his office with a determined expression on his face to get the paperwork on his desk and get out, only for his eyes to widen at the sight of a large gift basket waiting on his desk. He passed by the signed album of his favorite band on the faded yellow walls to walk up to his natural wooden desk. The gift basket was sat right next to the pile of paperwork that he needed to look through. The gift basket had onesies, a pair of pacifiers, 2 packs of small socks for the baby's feet, a stuffed teddy bear, and several bottles of baby soap. His lips lifted up into a smile at the gift basket. His office had already gotten one for him before his paternity leave, but it was thoughtful of them to give even more. Rocklock walked into the office area with the basket under his arm. "You know you guys didn't have to get me another basket, right?" "Sir, we didn't give you another gift basket," one of the ladies spoke up from her cubicle that was dressed in shades of purple. "That one was dropped off at the office actually. Fatgum delivered it." "Fatgum? That was nice of him. Maybe I'll pay for his takoyaki next time," Rocklock responded, prying around the basket until he found the little note tag. But instead of being the bigger note with Fatgum's personal emoticon that he likes to draw, it was a more simple style of kanji. Rocklock's eyebrows furrowed as he laid the gift basket down on one of the long tables right outside his office door. He flipped the note open more to see a little message. "Dear Pro Hero Rocklock, I heard about your little bundle of joy through the grapevine. I wish you a peaceful transition into fatherhood. Word of advice, get as much sleep as you can. Signed, N. N. Who is that? Are they a pro hero?" Rocklock asked out loud. "Does anyone know who sent this?" Fatgum said it was from Nedzu, a sidekick with glasses added, while some sidekicks behind her reacted to the news. Some of the sidekicks reacted more strongly than others. Nedzu. The sidekick continued, pushing up her glasses. "I think Fatgum said it was because he thought out and wanted to give you some advice or something similar." "Oh right," Rocklock sighed. He dragged his hands down his face. "I forgot he had a son. Fatgum told me about him before." "He has a son?" one of the other sidekicks asked, stunned by the news. "Really? I thought that was just a myth." Nedzu sneezed into a pocket square from his vest. Recovery Girl glanced over at the principal. "Are you getting a cold?" No, I don't normally get sick at all," Nedzu responded calmly. "Rocklock must have just received his present from me after all." "Ah," Recovery Girl nodded, like that was the most obvious answer as she organized the vitamin gummy candies she had. "Did you catch Izuku's performance while you were looking at the third-year stage?" "Indeed, I have a screen in my personal area just so I can catch up with how he's doing. So far, he has been using his skills nicely." "I'm sure you are very proud of him, Recovery Girl." Nedzu nodded to himself, as proud as a father should be. Recovery Girl smiled at him before turning to her bandage cabinet to recheck her stock before the battles began. She would have a lot of work to do once the students started fighting. Nedzu pulled out his phone to check the online news for any activity happening near his school before his eyes rested on an article title about the Hero Commission. His eyes darkened once he started to read the full article on the screen, hoping that the commission isn't stupid enough to be considering what this article is insinuating. Hero Commission is considering giving second chances. Hero Commission mentions getting more firepower to defeat rising threats. Nedzu hit the power button on his phone before hopping back onto the tiles of the nurse's office. He marched ahead back to the third-year stage with a blank smile on his face, not letting anyone see what kind of emotions are broiling underneath. If the commission brings him back, Nedzu will put him back where he belongs, one way or another. Sports Festival Battle Rounds. HEYY, welcome to the third round of the UA Sports Festival. The pairs have been selected during the break, Midnight announced as a large screen behind her displayed the incoming rounds. The pairs will go up against each other in battle until one is victorious. If they are pushed out of bounds, surrender, or can no longer fight, they lose the battle and their opponent will win. The screen displayed all the students that made it through paired up against random students. "Who the hell is your Uraraka?" Bakugo said out loud mostly to himself while gazing at the screen with an irritated and confused look on his face. And Izuku could pinpoint the exact time to the second of how fast Uraraka whipped her head around to stare at him. "Hey, Izuku!" Hatsume jogged up from behind him while everyone was still staring at the screen above them. "Since we are up against each other, would you mind wearing some of my support items, to level out the playing field?" Izuku raised his eyebrow, thinking about what she could gain from their battle if he wore the items she made. Then he asked, "Do you want me to show off your support items to the investors?" "Of course I do," Hatsume smiled, confirming what he was thinking. "The first round is Hatsume and Midoriya Izuku," Midnight announced, gesturing at the board. "The round will begin in a few minutes. Until then, all opponents will return to the designated waiting rooms until it is their time to battle." "Well then," Izuku grinned, "I'll be happy to be your model." With an explosive introduction in the obstacle course, he draws everyone's attention, from the hero course, Midoriya Izuku. And with an amazing show of talent during the obstacle course, she will draw in everyone's need for support items, from the support course, Hatsume. As Izuku walked out in braces around his legs, Midnight called out loudly from her spot in the middle of the battle area, "Those who must use equipment need to petition beforehand, and that is not your requested equipment." "Yes, I know, Hatsume requested for me to put on this for the round. I am just doing what she told me," Izuku answered back her with an honest smile. "She wants to have an equal fair fight since she will be using equipment as well. Is that all right?" "All right, I'll allow it," Midnight announced, pointing her whip at him. Izuku uses this time to look back at Mei, who is pulling down a microphone to her mouth. He takes his quest and started running as soon as Midnight started the round. As far as he can remember from what she told him about the inventions, he just needs to model them right to show off their functions. The leg parts should help him run and keep him from falling. "See how fast you're moving, Green? Those leg parts I designed are helping the wearer's movements along." Just like I thought, Izuku rushed towards her as the leg brace item increased his speed. "And I can." Hatsume paused and watched as he raced towards her with an added boost of speed from the leg parts, adding stability to his run. She dodged out of the way from two long attachments extended out from her jet pack. "Easily evade with my hydraulic attachments." While in the air, Izuku went out of his way to try and fall, only for his movements to be improved to a point where he could not fall down casually. As you can see before you, the Upato balancer is equipped with a 32-axis gyro sensor. It will be sure to keep the wearer from falling unless the wearer wants to, Hatsume narrated as Izuku continued to show off the balancer by running and leaning to the side only to never fall to the side. Izuku did every dramatic move he could do, which made the audience clap at his eccentric movements. He launched himself forward, forcing Hatsume to use her next item against him, capturing him inside a red rope net. He struggled against the rope, showing off the toughness of the rope to the audience. And this wonderful display showcases a capture gun to use against villains to encase them in a strong rope net that will limit their movements. This continued on for what seemed to be 10 minutes. During that time, Izuku was doing his best to showboat and truly act like a villain waiting to be captured. He's pretty sure he saw a hero's face in the stands go white when he started to maniacally laugh while acting his part. He shot up in the air at a different moment, showing off a new attachment that Hatsume put on the braces that allowed him to jump high in the sky like a rabbit. When it was all quiet, Hatsume ran out of inventions that she could show off. Thank you, I have nothing left to say, Hatsume said after she showed off all she could. She tucked the microphone away from her mouth before looking back to Izuku. Thanks for helping me out. Izuku happily waved back at her as she crossed over the white line while Midnight announced that she had surrendered the round to Izuku. He carefully shedded the items off of his body before jogging over to her so she could collect them from him. I'm glad I got to help you out. I'm happy too, your modeling skills weren't half bad, Hatsume grinned. When I run my own company, I can make you the model of my bobbies. I would be delighted, Izuku commented before he turned around with a smile on his face. He ran back to his own side while Hatsume exited the arena with her items in her arms. Izuku walked through the dark tunnel leading into the main hallway that would guide him back to the waiting rooms. As soon as he got back to the main waiting room, he was greeted at the door instantly by a grinning redhead with sharrow teeth. Aren't you mad that you didn't get to fight? Kirishima asked Izuku as soon as he walked into the waiting room with all the other students waiting for their match to be announced. Fight? For a moment Izuku looked confused before his eyes widened. Oh, not at all. She told me about her plan beforehand so I could help her gain attention on her support items. And it looks like it worked very well from the audience's reactions, Izuku explained, gesturing over to the whispering audience of pro heroes. He pointed up towards the top seats where the support companies were sitting. She only got to show off 2 of her inventions so far in the past rounds, so I wanted to help her show off all the stuff she wanted to. Kaminari hummed, and there is the advantage that you didn't need to fight, so the round was basically a freebie. Izuku blinked. Well, I guess so, but the round went to something more useful since now her inventions have been shown to whoever was watching. The only downside is you being used as a guinea pig, Shinso commented, leaning back against the chair. I don't think of it like that, Izuku frowned. I was more of a clumsy model trying to show off her goods. Anyway, who's next again? Zero asked, relaxing back into his seat since he didn't need to fight yet. I know I go up in the 5th round, but I forgot who goes before that. Me and Fukuyama, Mina raised her fists, pumping it into the air. I'm super pumped for it. And after that, Iida and I will face each other, Ojiro added from the back, swinging his tail. Speaking of that, Mina, shouldn't you be heading to the designated area? Oh, you're right, thanks Ojiro. Mina whooped up from her seat and took off towards the door. She pulled it open strongly and called out over her shoulder with a bright grin, see you guys after the battle. Speaking of designated areas, Izuku excuses himself to the bathroom only to make his way to the other side of the waiting rooms that Shoto would be waiting in. Not waiting to knock, he opens the tall door to peek his head inside to see the white and red hair of his friend. Hey, Izuku greeted and extended out the last syllable to make it stretch longer than it should have. Shoto glanced up from the table's surface that he was continuously staring at. Izuku, what are you doing here? Your battle has already ended. I know, Izuku smiled. I just came to say good luck to you. Shoto smiled gratefully at him. Thank you. How are you feeling? Izuku asked, perching himself to sit on top of the table while Shoto remained sitting on the foldable chair. Well, I'm sure Ashido will pack a punch given that her acid will corrode through my ice. And the fact that I have seen her fighting style during Toshinori-sensei's fighting class. It might be close if I fight her with just my ice, Shoto analyzed while making an icicle in his hand. His red hair slowly caught onto a small flame traveling down his arm into his other palm. Although if I use my fire, I wouldn't know how it will turn out. Izuku grinned as his head filled with ideas about how this kind of battle will turn out. He might have to bring a notebook up to the stands while he watches to make note of Mina's dancing style more and see how it will be affected by Shoto's flames. Are you saying you aren't just going to use both sides right at the beginning? No, Shoto asked, confused. Because there's no fun in it if it's over too quickly, Izuku offered an answer. Well, yeah, Shoto hummed for a moment, shrugging. Whenever we fought, it was more fun to prolong it since it was a way of spending time together. Shoto frowned as his thought train continued, but also the pro heroes will get a chance to see how well she does, since we both know from previous experience how this kind of stuff works out. Izuku knew very well considering he witnessed students never get an opportunity to study with a pro hero because they either don't get the chance to show them what they have or they get overshadowed by the more flashy quirks. I know all too well, so it's nice you are giving her the chance to shine, but don't go too easy on her. Oh, I never would. It would be a shame to insult her skill like that, Shoto replied easily. So what are you going to do after the match, since Iida is up after you? Shoto thought about it and hummed, well, I want to watch him, but afterwards I want to go check in with my family up in the stands, but I probably need to wear a hat. I have one of the long hoodies somewhere around here, Izuku brought up. I think I stuffed it into one of the lockers. You could borrow that so you won't be held up by any other heroes that want to talk with you. Thanks for that, Izuku. Right as his name was announced to start heading toward the fighting area. Oh, looks like I'm up, Shoto stated the obvious, brushing down his uniform as Izuku gave him a thumbs up. I'll be rooting for you with Iida in the stands, Izuku said as they both exited the room, with Shoto walking towards the arena and Izuku heading back to the stands to watch one of his friends fight. Shoto marched up to the battle area from his tunnel with present mic announcing his name. From the hero course, the first place winner of the entrance exams, Fukuyama Shoto. Mina was walking up to the area with a skip in her step while Mike announced her to the audience watching. And also from the hero course, she's light in her feet and quick to the punch, Mina. Midnight raised her arm in the air while counting down from 5. As soon as she hit 5, she called out, start. Shoto moved quickly right as Ashido started running when she said start. He bent to the ground and froze the area around him with ice, extending it towards her side. But she saw it coming, Mike away since she remembered the move from the obstacle course. She jumped in the air as soon as the ice reached her and started to move on it using the acid that coated her shoes. You have to try better than that, Icy, Ashido yelled out to him, skating like an ice skater on his ice. But instead of skates, she used her acid to move gracefully on the ice. Shoto watched as she did a jump in the air, already creating ice obstacles around him and a wall behind him so she couldn't get directly to him and push him out of bounds. Multiple ice obstacles formed from the ice floor with tall crossing towers in front of him. Ashido skated her way towards one of his obstacles, narrowing her eyes at the ice before leaping over it. While she jumped over it, she threw an arc of acid down at it. When she landed, she quickly spun around to see her acid bubbling away at the ice obstacle, making it melt under the corrosive liquid. She looked down at her hand before turning her attention to the ice obstacles with a grin. Shoto watched as he jumped over another, touching the tip with her hands to manually turn herself around on it while burning the ice with the acid from her palms. She spun in the air, making the audience shout out at least from their class section from her move. She landed back on the ice, sliding away from him as he watched her. Shoto narrowed his gaze, thinking about when to start to use his fire against her. She melted his ice as she skated, touching her hands against each obstacle while she moved. Shoto felt like a sitting duck as she moved through the defenses he put up. When she moved towards the left to get rid of more obstacles blocking him in, he started to run towards the right, using his own moves to skate with the carefreeness of a professional ice skater. Ashido spotted him as he skated past her, grinning as he finally was in her range to attack. She started to skate after him, watching as the obstacles that were still formed started to melt quickly when he passed them, no doubt using his fire to melt them down quicker to give him more room to move away. She jumped over a melting obstacle and aimed straight at him with her acid onto to have it countered with a flash of ice that wrapped around the acid throw, making it land on the ground before cracking and melting away as Shoto continued to skate away from her grasp. Ashido raced after him while Shoto skated away. Once he had enough space between them, Shoto started to ignite his left side as Ashido paused in his skating. He spun around on the ice, melting the ice back while he put a fire wall around him. Ashido threw her hands over her face at the feeling of the overwhelming warmth. While Shoto dipped his head down, he taunted back at her, "What's wrong? Can't handle it." Mina laughed, looking even more ready for the incoming fights. "I can handle anything you throw at me, Fukuyama." She skated around the firewall, trying to throw acid at the wall to soften the flames to attack him more directly, only for the firewall to remain strong as Shoto blocked each acid attack with his ice to quell down the corrosiveness. He spread his arms out and created a second fire wall around him, blocking at least a few more feet between him and Ashido. Mina's balance was thrown off trying to avoid the enlarged fire wall that borders came at her quickly. She reached out to try and launch an acid attack at an ice formation that Shoto was making inside of the wall only for her to slip as she was making a turn on her own acid. Shoto's eyes shot towards her, taking the advantage to push her out of bounds. He raced forward and created a small ice wall that he continued to push with his ice, making her roll towards the out-of-bounds line. He stepped out of the flames to push at the ice, watching as she struggled to get back up quickly before she was finally pushed out of bounds. Midnight called the match as soon as Mina crossed the white line border. Ashido Mina is out of bounds. The winner is Fukuyama Shoto. He strolled over to her while she was dusting off her uniform pants. He tilted his head. You okay? Yeah, Ashido gasped, turning her attention to him like a thought just came to her mind. Fukuyama, you should totally make an ice rink one of these days. That was so awesome. I'll make one if you teach me some of the dance moves you did. I feel like they could be a great use for fighting. Ha, you got a deal, dude, Mina said, shaking his hand to seal the deal. He looked up to the stands as she walked away to the tunnel and spotted his family waving to him, looking excited. He smiled briefly up at them, waving at their spot before jogging over to his desperate tunnel that he came through. After their battle, Cementos had to fix up the area from the fire, ice, and acid damage for the next round. Following Izuku's idea from earlier, Shoto pulled Izuku with him towards the waiting area where Iida was anticipating his match that was coming up next. He knocked at the door, waiting for Iida to swing open the door with a confused look on his face. What are you two doing here? Iida questioned, waving his hands through the air sharply. You two are supposed to be in the main waiting room or in the stands. Izuku pouted. So. We wanted to wish you good luck in your battle, Shoto replied like it was the easiest question to answer. Oh, Iida paused, looking bashful. Thank you. That's what friends are for. I believe in both you and Ojiro's fighting ability, but I really want all three of us to continue on. So. Izuku clapped a hand onto his shoulder. Kick his ass, Iida. Language, Iida frowned but still patted Izuku's hand gently, grateful for his support. Kick his butt, Shoto remedied the curse word. We'll be waiting for you in the stands when you finish. Iida took a deep breath right as his name was called over the speaker to report to the arena. Well, see you two after my fight. Good luck, they both yelled after him as he walked confidently towards the tunnel leading to the battle stage. Iida walked forward in strong strides until he reached the arena with the audience waiting and Ojiro silently entering from the other side. Straight from the hero course, UA's young speedster, Iida Tenya. And from the other corner, a martial artist master also from the hero course, Ojiro Mashiro. And STARRTTT, present mic announced by yelling. Iida took the cue and started to run towards Ojiro with his arms stretched out, intent on pushing him out of bounds. It would be a simple and easy way to take down his opponent in the battle with no unnecessary harm. At least that's what he thought until Ojiro bounced on his tail out of his way. Iida stopped short, turning around to see Ojiro balancing on his tail for a moment, dipping back down to the ground. I'm not going down without a fight, class president. Iida readies his stance while Ojiro stares at him, waiting for his next move. He rushed towards him again, only for Ojiro to flip over him, landing on his feet. He could hear the audience cheer briefly from the aerial move. Ojiro raced towards him, lashing his tail against Iida when he was still distracted. Iida blocked against his tail, feeling the powerful hit push him backwards. Iida threw Ojiro off of him while Ojiro bounced back to land a hit directly into Iida's chest. He dodged as Ojiro went in for another hit, moving to the side as Ojiro moved at him. He tried to push him again, only for Ojiro to dodge by ducking down. Ojiro went to sideswipe Iida with his tail, only for Iida to grab him by his tail. Ojiro looked shocked as Iida winded up his throw and swung him towards the boundary. Ojiro fell down and rolled out of bounds as Iida ran towards him, stopping short when Ojiro went past the line. And Ojiro Mashiro is out of bounds. Iida Tenya wins this round, Midnight called out as the audience cheered for his victory. Iida walked over the line and extended his hand down to Ojiro, who was still on the ground from the throw. Iida pursed his lips. I apologize if I was too harsh on my throw. I wouldn't want to hurt a fellow classmate like that. Ojiro waves him off with a reassuring smile on his face. Nah, you're okay, Iida. You put up a good fight. You as well, Iida nodded, a glint appearing in his glasses for a moment from the sunlight shining down on the arena. He grinned. I look forward to a rematch after the festival. You're on, Ojiro agreed with a determined expression. He walked away from Iida to the side he walked in through. Good luck in the next matches, he called out over his shoulder. Iida waved back at him before exiting the area with a bright smile on his face. I hope Tensei will see this. After Iida's battle, a new round had begun between two hero course students named Hantasiro and Yaoyorozu Momo. Fayumi wondered if both of them were in Shoto's class as they began to fight against each other. The boy lashed out with tape while the girl pulled out a sword from the inside of her shirt to cut any tape that got close to capturing her. Fayumi whooped along with the rest of the crowd right as her phone buzzed with a notification. She looked down before glancing back at her mother and brother who were focused on the field below them. She dug her hand into her skirt pocket to retrieve her phone and read what the notification said on the lock screen. As soon as she realized what the notification said, she gasped. It was from the news site that she normally got regular news about the area she was teaching in. But now that headline was saying something that she didn't want to take lightly, especially concerning that it might be alluding to Endeavor and the Hero Commission. She quickly started to read the words in the screen, praying that they weren't talking about who she thought it was. While she scrolled down the news site to finish reading the article, Natsuo started to lean towards her space to try and read over her shoulder. She could tell from the addition of warm breath near her shoulder. Natsuo whispered, "What are you reading, hero stuff?" "Something like that," Fayumi answered, not wanting to drag much attention to her phone if their mother got too curious. Oh dear, she really didn't want mom to be stressed about what was happening. It finally clicked on the last part of the article. The Hero Commission has neither confirmed or denied the identity of the pro-hero they are considering, but evidence points to the pro-hero being the flame hero, Endeavor. It was at that moment that Natsuo truly read the words on her screen and acknowledged what it meant. Natsuo forced a smile on his face as he turned towards their mother. "Hey mom, Fayumi and I are going to get some snacks before the next match. Do you want anything?" "Oh, just water would be nice," Ray answered softly to her son with a carefree smile. "Or maybe something with fruit." "Gotcha, come on Fayumi, can't waste any time before the lines start getting hectic again," Natsuo said, lightly nudging his older sister out of their seats to guide her towards the hallways leading to the food court area. Natsuo came to a stop right when they entered a mostly vacant hall. He kept his voice down, but his tone was edging into confusion and anger. They are seriously trying to bring him back. "Yes, that's what the article was saying, but I don't understand," Fayumi replied, starting to pace back and forth in a semicircle. "They have so many heroes out on the field that can help. Why would they do this?" "Because he's a big, flashy pro-hero." Natsuo's frown was icy cold to match his grim expression. Fayumi wanted to reach out to reassure him like she always did, but he stepped back before she could even reach out her hand. "They'll try to make the USJ the whole reason of bringing him back, probably trying to get more protection." He used finger quotes in the air to emphasize his point. "They probably just want to bring back the bucks they were gaining with him in the top 10. Hell, maybe they are just doing it for fun at this point, no matter who they are affecting." "Look, it might not be true, it could be just a rumor," Fayumi tried to reason with the bright side of things. "There are many fire quirks in Japan, hell, in all of Asia. Maybe they could be talking about that burnin' girl that used to be at his old agency." Fayumi dragged her sweater sleeves down her arm when she felt a sudden chill creep up her back. She pouted, wondering if her quirk was acting up because of the emotions she was dealing with. She flexed her fingers but felt no pull or push of her ice quirk, which was strange. "I want to believe that it's just a rumor, but we both know that isn't possible. Not with something like this," Natsuo added, looking downwards. Fayumi reaches out slowly to wrap her arm around her younger brother in a small show of comfort. "If they try to bring that flaming bastard back, I don't know what I'll do," Natsuo sighed, pressing his fingers in the space between his eyebrows. He gently pulled back from her brace after a few more moments. "I'll call Taoya and tell him about it, see if he knows, or just inform him about what they are trying to do." "Why is it cold in here?" Natsuo asked with a frown. Is it true? Fayumi could feel her face drain of color when she recognized the familiar voice. She whipped her head around to see the scarred face of her little brother, who was hiding his mismatched hair under a large hoodie that she knew belonged to Izuku. She could tell from the little sewn-on patches on the sleeves with multiple pro-hero symbols. Shoto, Fayumi gasped, "It's not, I don't." Natsuo walked over to Shoto, who was still stunned from whatever he heard. "How much did you hear?" When Fayumi was saying something, it was a rumor. "I didn't know what you both were talking about until you mentioned him," Shoto answered quietly, his breathing changing patterns from what Fayumi could notice. She approached slowly behind Natsuo as Shoto frantically looked up at her. "Who is trying to bring him back?" Natsuo sighed. "We don't know if it has been actually confirmed or not, but the article says the Hero Commission is thinking about bringing someone like him back for extra firepower." Shoto looked to the ground, breathing in deeply while placing his hand on the wall. His left hand started to steam and his other started to frost over. Fayumi slowly brings Shoto forward until she could wrap her hand around his own to ground him. Natsuo stayed silent, motioning over Shoto's head that he was going to call Taoya. He cast one glance down to Shoto, patting his head before silently moving away while he calmed down. Fayumi could still see that Natsuo was upset over the news when she stormed off down the hallway to find somewhere quieter to call their older brother. She cursed at herself for not moving quickly enough to comfort both of her brothers adequately. "It's okay, Shoto, we are all safe. All 5 of us," Fayumi reassured, brushing her hand against his hair right underneath his hood when she heard his breathing steady a little bit. When he did it flying away from her contact in any form, she co-tongued to reassure him. "Everything will be all right." "I'll protect you," Fayumi promised as Shoto curled into her embrace. "I'll protect everyone in this family." Dabai whistled as he jumped over the rooftops down the street on his patrol. His belt buckles clanged against each other when he landed on the next roof. He was about to run to jump onto the next one when he felt a buzzing in his pockets. It didn't come from his transmitter to track any ongoing crimes. It was coming from his phone. He dug his hand into his pocket to dig up his cellular device to see who was calling him. Taoya slid his finger across the screen to answer the call once he saw his brother's name. "Sup, I thought you were." "The Hero Commission douchebags are trying to get Endeavor out of jail," Natsuo interrupted his greeting. Taoya could almost feel his eyes bulging out of his head. He could feel some of the flames rising inside of him. "They're doing what now?" "Apparently the Hero Commission is thinking about letting him go free since he is on such good behavior, and that they need a hero like him if something like the attack on UA were to happen again," Natsuo replied with a tense tone in his voice. Taoya forced a laugh out of himself, trying to reason that this was a messed-up prank or a fake news article. "You are kidding me, right?" "No, I wish I was," Natsuo admitted with a sigh. He could picture his brother with that twisted-up look on his face every time Endeavor is mentioned or remembers him. "Fayumi read the article and I read more of it when I separated before calling you, and now I'm calling you while Fayumi is trying to calm Shoto down." "Shoto knows?" Taoya's eyes widened, looking around like he was expecting his brother to be on the street he was patrolling. "Isn't he supposed to be competing?" "His round was before Iida's win. Shoto was already done with a win under his belt while we were discussing it. He overheard us talking about it," Natsuo responded. "So he is probably not doing well right now." "Gotta admit, I don't know why they think this is a good idea in the first place. There are other heroes who can do the job better," Natsuo breathed out, his voice becoming unsteady as he continued all over the phone. "They are going to pull that therapy card like how that bastard has changed all those years in jail and now he is ready to enter back into the scene. They will sweep everything under the rug, like we don't fucking matter." Taoya shook his head. "That's what they do to people like us, leave us behind in the dust. They probably only want him because of the damn strength he has." "Yeah, they apparently need more firepower even though there are so many other heroes they can ask," Natsuo ranted. Taoya looks down at his own hand and produces a blue flame. "Yeah, firepower, it's not like we have too many heroes on staff," Taoya groaned. He started to talk in an exaggerated tone laced with sarcasm. "No, let's call in the abuser." "I don't know how we are going to deal with this," Natsuo stated. "Simple, we don't," Natsuo choked over the phone, making Taoya smile at the speechless noise his brother made. "We are already safe away from him with the restraining order against him. Plus we have Nedzu on our side." and I know that he won't be stupid enough to try and continue pushing Nedzu's bad side. Natsuo was quiet for a moment. Do you think? Of course he already knows. He's Nedzu. He knows everything, Taoya added, wondering why no noise has popped up on his receiver yet. There hasn't been any sort of crime in the last 20 minutes or so. It was getting a little too quiet for his tastes. He is probably forming a plan to kick his ass again. Yeah, I just wasn't to keep this from Mom for now. At least until we get home. I don't want her to find out this while she is supposed to be enjoying watching Shoto, Natsuo replied. Yeah, I don't want her to freak out surrounded by strangers. Taoya held the phone tightly, thinking about his mother, who was almost crying over the fact he had brought her favorite flowers to celebrate her last birthday. Wait until tonight to tell her at home, since we are safe there more than any of us are in public, and be ready to catch her when she enviably falls. I might be a tad late because of this patrol, but I can probably stop by her favorite place to eat and pick up something to soften the news. All right, I better head back now, Natsuo said honestly, the background noise crackling with his voice. Be safe on your patrol, bro, love you. Taoya rolled his eyes at the overly exaggerated affection through the phone. Yeah, love you too, brat. Now back to patrol. Taoya refocused back to the task at hand. He started to jog down the rooftop to observe the street below, only to see no other hero other than him around. Isn't Ingenium supposed to be around here? Taoya continued to search with a frown. He knew that Ingenium wouldn't just leave patrol with no warning from the times he had worked with him to take down big villains. In mid-jump over one alley, he heard the unmistakable sound of metal clashing against each other. He narrowed down the area where the sound came from and rushed towards it right as he heard Ingenium yell out. Taoya continued to rush as fast as he could, using Ingenium's last shout to guide himself there to rescue him from whatever was happening to him. Once he got on the scene, all he saw was Ingenium laying on the floor with a pool of blood from underneath him. His helmet lay on the side of him with broken lenses scattered on the cement, and his transmitter to call for help was broken at his feet. His bare face was bruised as his body laid on the ground, not moving even an inch after Dabai had appeared to help. Dabai looked up to see the infamous hero killer with swords poking out from behind his back. The vigilante stared down at him with a sinister grin on his face, a strip of red fabric covering his eyes. Dabai was looking into the eyes of Stain. The man responsible for the reason why Ingenium, Tenya's brother, was lying on the ground with blood all over him. I wrote like 6,000 words for this chapter. I'm so proud of myself right now. I'm trying to write my way out of this writing funk. The year of 2022 will be my writing year, even if I have to deal with a new college semester.